I've always believed the road carries memories in its asphalt, secrets pressed into every crack, stories that refuse to die. But nothing prepares you for the places where memories are all that remain, places that once held lives, laughter, and light, and now sit hollow under a sun that feels just a little too cold. My name is Marcus Hale. I'm 34 years old, and for the past 2 years, I've been roaming the western United States in a beat-up Class C RV, chasing the comfort of solitude and the thrill of exploring what others abandoned long ago. It was supposed to be a personal journey, but what I found instead were questions that should have stayed buried. Ghost towns, those forgotten veins branching off faded highways, have a way of speaking to people like me, not through words, through atmosphere, through the unsettling sensation that the town itself is watching you. My first encounter with that silence happened in a place so far off any map that I started wondering if it had ever officially existed. Desert sand swallowed the old road miles back, forcing me to crawl forward, tires grinding over gritty earth. The sun sat low, stretched wide, bleeding orange across a sky too empty for clouds. I had gotten a tip from an old prospector in Nevada, a simple warning disguised as a joke. "If you find Hartley Springs," he said, "don't stay the night. Folks who do, they don't always leave." I laughed at the time. People love ghost stories, especially ones that drive tourists away from their favorite secret spots. But when I finally rolled into that forgotten town, the joke felt like a curse. What was left of Hartley Springs looked like a set from a Western film decades past its final shoot. An old saloon leaned sideways, windows cracked, swinging doors long gone. A rust-eaten pickup sagged in the middle of the road with no tires. A gas station sat at the far end, frozen in 1978, its pumps like bones piercing sand. My headlights cut through layers of dust so thick the air itself felt dehydrated. And there were RV tracks, weeks old, maybe months. They wandered into town, circled once, then vanished. No tracks leaving. I told myself tire marks fade fast in desert wind. I told myself someone parked here, then left before the trail disappeared. I told myself a lot of things because sometimes the only way to keep your pulse from spiking is to pretend danger doesn't exist. I parked near the saloon, killed the engine, and let the silence settle in. But silence wasn't the right word. It was absence. Life had been vacuumed out of the world, leaving only a stage and me as the lone actor. That night started like every other. Cooked a simple meal, checked the locks, wrote in my journal, but the air clawed its way into my nerves. There were no crickets, no wind, no shifting wildlife. The desert should have sung, but here it felt like even sound was afraid to linger. I sat by the RV window watching the town in the moonlight, and then movement. Not fast, not threatening, just wrong. A door swayed in the gas station, slow, like someone on the other side pushed it with their fingertip. There was no wind, not even a breeze. I stared, waiting for a figure to step out, a coyote to bolt, anything. But the door simply continued its lazy swing until it eased shut. The sound was faint, too faint for that distance. Metallic squeak like it echoed straight into my ears instead of across the town. I tried distracting myself with hopeful thinking. Ghost towns are unstable. Wood expands, metal contracts, things shift on their own. But every minute that passed made my heartbeat louder in my skull. The air tasted stale, as if I were breathing exhaled fear. Then came the sound of footsteps. Crunching gravel, slow, deliberate, coming from behind the saloon. I froze. I didn't move, didn't blink, barely breathed. The steps approached until they sounded just outside my door, one pace away. I felt the RV shift ever so slightly, like someone leaned against it. A breath brushed against the metal skin of the rig. A faint scrape. My blood turned ice. I dared a glance over my shoulder at the door window, expecting nothing and terrified of anything. At first, there was only darkness. Then the silhouette of a head slowly rose into frame. Just the suggestion of a face, shadow carved into deeper shadow, not peering in, facing away, as if listening. Every instinct I had screamed, "Stay still." Whatever it was, I didn't want it to know I saw it. My hands hovered inches above the door lock. Sweat slid down my wrist, cold as winter. The silhouette paused, then lowered again, sinking out of view like it melted into the earth. The footsteps returned, moving away now. Gravel crunching toward the gas station. Then nothing. That should have been my cue to leave. But curiosity is a reckless drug, especially when fear gives it sharper teeth. I couldn't shake one thought from my head. Where did those other RVs go? The tracks told one story, the town told another, and I needed to know which story was true. Hours passed. Midnight dripped into early morning. My eyes burned from staring at every window, waiting for motion. When I finally closed them, just for a moment, I woke up to pale light seeping across the interior walls. Dawn in the desert arrives like truth, harsh, revealing. I stepped outside, boots sinking slightly into powdery dirt. The stillness remained, but had changed. Something in the air felt rearranged. A fresh trail in the sand led toward the gas station. Footprints. Bare, human-sized, but spaced strangely, like the stride of someone forgetting how to walk. I followed them, slowly, cautiously. Fear navigated each step. The tracks ended at the doorway where that metal squeak had echoed hours before. My reflection stared back in the dusty glass, ghost white under the morning sun. I swallowed, nudged the door. It moaned open, same exact pitch as last night. The smell hit me first, old oil and stale gasoline, layered with something wet and rotten underneath it all. Inside, shelves toppled, broken bottles scattered, a cash register lid hanging open, and deeper in the dark, an RV stove. Just the stove. No RV. A faded sticker clung to its side, a national park badge I recognized from a recent missing persons bulletin. A chill raced up my spine so violently I nearly stumbled backward. People who vanished had been here. But it wasn't just the stove. There was a folding chair, a cooler, scattered food wrappers, personal belongings torn apart like someone or something had rifled through them. One item lay perfectly untouched, a journal, its pages curled, edges yellowed but the handwriting fresh. I turned to the last entry. It waits until you stay the night. It waits where the town remembers. It watches from the ground below. If you see the head rise, don't let it know you're here. A shape shifted in the corner behind me, soft scrape of movement. I stepped back into sunlight, clutching the journal tight. That was it. Curiosity had taken enough. I needed distance between me and that place. I locked myself inside the RV, threw the rig into ignition. The engine coughed awake. I accelerated toward the trail of my own tire marks. Sand spit behind me. Relief washed through me when the town shrank smaller in the mirror. But then I saw it, another set of footprints trailing the RV. Following. I didn't stop driving until pavement returned under my tires. Only then did I breathe again. But the journal in my passenger seat pulsed like a heartbeat. Someone had warned me. Someone had tried escaping too. I should have quit right there, should have chalked it up to fear-fueled imagination. But the desert does something to logic. After Hartley Springs, I needed answers. Needed to know if these ghost towns truly carried a hunger for the living. And maybe, deep down, I needed to prove to myself that fear alone can't erase people from the world. That's why I headed north, to a mining town buried beneath Montana cliffs, a settlement once called Meridian Ridge. They said the entire family that ran the general store vanished overnight. They said even the sheriff's search dogs refused to step past the bridge. They said drunk campers sometimes go there for thrills and don't return. I thought rumors always grow in places with too much emptiness. I thought evidence disappears faster than people do. I thought I understood what silence meant. But Meridian Ridge taught me something darker. Silence isn't empty. Silence remembers. The climb into Montana's high country put a weight in my chest that had nothing to do with altitude. Pine trees flanked the narrow road like silent jurors, towering silhouettes that dimmed the daylight. The sign for Meridian Ridge had long since fallen, lying face down in the brush as if it could no longer bear to point anyone forward. My GPS showed nothing but blank space. I followed the map I'd scribbled down from locals. More warnings disguised as casual advice. Stay on the gravel and don't leave before sunrise. They always mentioned sunrise. The way their eyes flicked away afterward told me why. When I rolled into Meridian Ridge, the ghost town breathed a different kind of fear than Hartley Springs. This one had trees, dense enough to hide anything. The buildings stood mostly intact, weather-scarred wood, windows clouded with grime, doors shut tight as if the wind had never existed. I parked near the old general store, a crooked sign overhead reading goods and mercantile in chipped, faded letters. The air smelled of sap and rust. I stepped out and noticed something immediately. No birds, no distant howl, not even insects buzzing in the summer heat. The silence pressed in close, thick enough that my ears strained for any sound at all. The forest should have been alive, but here everything felt paused. Inside the general store, dust blanketed every shelf, settled in layers like decades of neglect. Old canned food, faded advertisements, stacks of newspapers frozen in time, until I brushed one and it crumbled like ash. A single lantern hung from the ceiling, swaying ever so slightly, but there was no breeze, no movement, only that faint, deliberate swing. I backed out, careful not to disturb anything else. There were RV tracks here too. A few, fresh enough to still look sharp, a couple of days old at most. But again, no tracks leading away. I told myself the campers had just hiked deeper into the woods, but the trees loomed behind the town like a black wall, swallowing distance. Nobody walked in there. Nobody who returned anyway. Evening approached faster than I wanted. I considered driving back the way I came, but something about leaving after dusk felt like a mistake, like I would be chased if I tried. So I stayed. I set up inside the RV, locked every door, lowered every shade, and tried to let my heart slow. It happened earlier this time. Right after the last light slipped behind the ridge, the footsteps arrived. Soft at first, pine needles muffling part of the sound. Then closer. Heavy, intentional. They circled the RV like someone counting windows, memorizing entry points. Gravel crushed under a weight that wasn't afraid to be heard. I held my breath and listened. The footsteps stopped at the driver's side door. A long silence, long enough that I started counting seconds to keep from unraveling. Then came the tapping, gentle, like a fingertip, drumming a patient rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. Slow, almost curious. My heartbeat drowned it out, but I couldn't ignore the vibrations. I didn't dare look. I kept every curtain sealed tight, but through the stitched fabric I saw the faintest shift of shape, a figure leaning close, taller than any person should naturally be. Its head was wrong, angled. The tapping paused. A soft scrape trailed down the length of the door, like nails dragging through metal. I squeezed my eyes shut, willed myself invisible. And after what felt like a lifetime of silence, the footsteps moved again, around the back to the other side. Something brushed against the wall of the RV, testing, pressing, learning. I clutched the steering wheel, ready to drive blind if that lock turned. Suddenly, 3 sharp knocks. Boom, boom, boom. Not at a door, but against the rear bumper. The RV jolted forward. Something immense was behind me, waiting. A voice, not quite a voice, more a vibration, rose from the ground beneath me, a low hum, like someone whispering into dirt. It resonated through the floor, through my bones, and beneath the hum was a pattern. Breath, not mine, not human. It felt ancient, like the earth itself was inhaling. That was the moment suspicion broke into dread. Whatever hunted in these ghost towns wasn't wandering. It was guarding. It wasn't lost. It knew exactly where I was. The humming faded. Footsteps retreated. Gravel shifted into silence. Minutes passed like hours. I waited until the sky outside turned cold blue, the first hint of morning. When the sun finally crested the ridge, I forced myself outside. That's when I saw them, the footprints. Dozens of them, surrounding the RV in chaotic loops, bare, like in Hartley Springs. But these were deeper, as if the ground had tried to swallow whoever or whatever made them. Some prints showed 4 toes, some 5. One had 7. I stepped back, choking on disbelief. No animal leaves tracks like that. No human does either. It wasn't just the footprints. A smear of dirt stained the back bumper, a handprint shape but stretched too wide, the fingers too long. I grabbed my keys with shaking hands, jumped inside, and drove without breakfast, without second thoughts. The town shrank in the mirror, swallowed by trees, and with it that crushing silence. On the open highway, I could finally think again. And I realized something. These places weren't just abandoned. They had been emptied, cleared out, erased. The towns didn't die quietly. They were smothered. 2 encounters should have convinced me. 2 brushes with whatever hides beneath forgotten soil should have been enough. But fear does something twisted to curiosity. It makes you wonder whether leaving without answers is the same as being hunted forever by what you didn't understand. That's why I went looking for a third ghost town. The last one. The one that changed everything. They called it Silver Vale, a desert mining settlement hidden where Nevada's dust meets the mountains. Every route to it had been crossed off official maps 40 years ago. A chemical leak, they said. The ground poisoned. Unsafe. But RV campers don't always follow the rules, and Silver Vale had rumors older than any contamination. Rumors of campsites that moved when nobody was looking, of voices calling from beneath cracked pavement, of shadows that stayed in place even after you left. By then, I thought I was ready. I thought seeing the strange twice meant I could handle a third time. But Silver Vale didn't offer warnings. It offered consequences. The last thing you want in a ghost town is the feeling that you're expected, that the air is holding its breath not because you arrived, but because you finally showed up. That's how Silver Vale greeted me. The town lay in a shallow valley, only a few derelict homes, a boarded-up post office, and a school with windows like blind eyes. The silence here felt different, not empty, anticipatory, like a theater crowd waiting for the curtain to rise. I parked near the old school, the engine ticking as it cooled. The ground looked disturbed, patches of sand darker, churned by something dragging beneath it. The breeze carried a smell I couldn't place at first, metallic, sweet. The scent of earth pulled up from too deep. The sunlight dimmed faster than expected, the mountains casting early shadows. I checked my map, my supplies, my resolve. Fear rattled like something loose inside me. But I stayed. I shouldn't have, but I did. And when night fully arrived, Silver Vale finally revealed why nobody leaves its forgotten streets. It started with the ground, a tremor barely noticeable at first, like a shiver running through the dirt. Then another, stronger. The RV shifted. I stared at the floor, panic setting in as dust sprinkled from the ceiling. Outside, movement. Sand lifted in ripples, traveling like waves beneath a vast, unseen body. Then the whispers, soft, rising. Not from the air, from underground. Voices, plural. So many that my skin prickled. Words I couldn't understand, but the meaning was clear as fear. Stay. The earth split, just a crack, thin as a pencil line, but long. A pulse of darkness throbbed beneath it, and slowly, impossibly, shapes pushed up from the gap. Fingers, human, but not. Too long, too many joints, they curled into the moonlight like they were tasting the air. Then came the heads, rising. Just like the journal warned. Shadowed faces, no eyes, no mouths, just smooth placeholders where features should have been. They turned toward the RV in perfect unison. I backed away, trapping myself against the opposite wall. My heartbeat wasn't beating anymore. It was slamming. Every instinct inside me screamed the same thought. They don't take what you see. They take what sees you. One of the heads tilted, listening. It knew. I was awake. That tiny tilt was enough to break whatever paralysis held me. I lunged for the driver's seat, turned the key before I even sat down. The engine roared, drowning out the whispers. The ground buckled as I slammed the gas. Figures clawed free from the earth, reaching upward, stretching bone-thin limbs like banners pulled too tight. The RV lurched forward. Wheels spun in the sand. I felt hands grip the underside, pulling, trying to drag me down with them. The bumper slammed against the earth's rising teeth. I screamed through clenched teeth, flooring the accelerator until rubber finally found traction, and then release. Hands slipped. The ground fell away. The RV shot out of the valley like a bullet escaping a barrel. I didn't look back. Not until miles later when Silver Vale vanished into darkness and the highway reappeared like salvation. Even then, I kept driving. I didn't sleep for 2 days. I didn't trust stillness. I didn't trust my eyes whenever shadows pooled at the corners. Because here's the truth no one wants to admit. America's ghost towns aren't abandoned. They're fed, kept alive by whatever hungers beneath them. They're traps disguised as history. I don't camp near forgotten settlements anymore. I don't chase rumors. But sometimes, late at night, when the RV creaks and the desert outside is too quiet, I hear the vibration under the floorboards, the hum of something that remembers my footsteps. And I know this: those who vanish in ghost towns aren't lost. The towns remember exactly where they are. And one day they might remember me, too. I never planned on spending a night in the Ozarks alone, but the truth is, some roads pull you in before you even know you've taken the turn. And that night, as the last of the daylight bled into the treetops, I felt the woods leaning closer, like they recognized me, like they'd been waiting. My name is Carter Hale. I'm 37 years old, and I've been wandering these back roads in an old Volkswagen Westphalia I rebuilt with my own hands. Most folks chase the coastlines or head west to the desert. Me, I've always felt drawn to the thick green silence of the Ozark National Forest. I grew up in a town just an hour south of here, and even as a kid, the Ozarks held a reputation, not just for beauty, but for things people didn't like to talk about. Disappearances, lights, calls that didn't sound like any known animal, and every once in a while, a rumor about something tall moving between the trees. But I don't scare easily. Not really. Or at least I used to tell myself that. I rolled into a primitive campsite just before dusk, one of those unofficial clearings locals use when they want to be away from everything. No hookups, no bathrooms, no other vehicles for miles. Just a thin dirt path carved between towering oaks, and a fire ring made from river stones smudged with old soot. I killed the engine, and the silence came down so heavy it felt like a blanket thrown over my shoulders, the kind of silence that makes you stand still without knowing why. The first thing that unsettled me was the smell. The air carried something metallic, faint but sharp, like wet iron. I told myself it was just the nearby creek turning over after a storm, but the sky was bone dry and my instincts didn't buy my own excuse. Still, I forced a slow breath, unpacked my chair, and started setting up camp. You learn fast, camping alone, that unease usually fades once you get your bearings. But not here. Not that night. As I gathered kindling, I kept hearing soft thumps in the underbrush, too heavy for squirrels, too deliberate for deer. I've hunted these woods, hiked them, slept under them more nights than I can count. I know the difference between something moving with instinct and something moving with intent. This felt like the forest was paying attention. Still, I pushed the feeling aside. I lit the fire, made a quick meal, and tried to settle into that familiar rhythm of being off-grid. The flames crackled steadily, but the woods weren't responding the way they should. No chorus of insects rising with the night, no owls, no breeze whispering through the canopy. Just quiet. A quiet so complete it made every pop of the fire feel like a violation. When the first sound came, it was so faint I thought it was my imagination, a low, rhythmic clicking echoing between the trees. Not natural, not random. Click, 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 each one spaced evenly apart as if counting something. I froze. The clicking stopped the moment I stilled. I waited, leaning slightly forward, listening with my whole body. The firelight flickered across the moss-covered trunks surrounding the clearing. Nothing moved, but the darkness beyond the flames felt thick, almost textured, like something was standing just outside the glow. I called out, "Hello?" The woods swallowed my voice whole. No echo, no return, just silence. I tried to shake it off, forcing myself to sit back down, but the tension coiled in my chest didn't loosen. I knew enough about fear to recognize when my brain was trying to warn me. And yet, there's a stubborn streak in me, a need to prove to myself that I'm not as breakable as the world sometimes makes me feel. So I stayed put, poking at the fire, listening for anything that would give me a reason to pack up and leave. Then the clicking came again. Closer. I stood up slowly, grabbed my flashlight from the van, and swept the beam across the trees. The light cut through the darkness in sharp lines, illuminating bark, branches, empty space. Nothing unusual, nothing out of place. But then I noticed something. A set of impressions in the mud, halfway between the fire ring and the start of the tree line. Large, deep, and spaced too far apart for any deer or black bear common to this area. I walked toward them, each step careful. The beam of my flashlight trembled just enough for me to notice. The prints were humanoid, but not human, longer, wider at the front. The toes curled slightly inward like talons. I knelt down, hovering my hand over the nearest one. The ground was disturbed recently, within minutes. Something had been standing right there, watching me. My throat tightened. I rose slowly, scanning the perimeter again. The Missouri humidity clung to me, but a cold shiver slid down my spine. For the first time that evening, I considered the truth. Maybe camping here alone hadn't been a good idea. I backed toward the fire, heat brushing my legs, grounding me just enough to think. Whatever made those prints wasn't afraid of the flames. It had approached while the fire was strong, while I was awake. I kept the flashlight fixed toward the tree line. But then I heard it, a shift in the darkness. A breath, a footstep. It was subtle, but it was real, and it came from my left. I whipped the beam in that direction, and the moment the light hit the underbrush, something moved, fast, silent, slipping behind a tree too quickly for me to identify. But I saw it, a silhouette, tall, taller than me by at least 2 feet. Shoulders hunched, limbs too long, like it had been stretched. My chest went tight, and a wave of dread rolled through me so strong it nearly buckled my knees. I stumbled backward, instinct taking over. I grabbed my fire poker, just a metal rod, barely a weapon, and positioned myself between the flames and the tree line. My heart hammered so loudly I could feel it in my palms. Another sound, this time behind me. I spun around, and the flashlight beam swept across the far edge of the clearing, where my van sat, door still open. The shadows beneath it rippled. Something was crawling underneath my Volkswagen. I stepped forward, adrenaline wiping every rational thought from my head. I crouched low, shining the beam under the van. Dirt, leaves, the lower curve of the engine, and then 2 eyes opened. Not glowing, not animal-like. Reflective, as if they were catching the light the same way a person's would, except they were too far apart and too still. I froze, breath locked in my throat. The eyes didn't blink, didn't flinch, just watched me, studied me. I didn't move for what felt like an eternity. Then the eyes shifted, slowly to the left, and I heard a second set of clicks. Softer, almost amused. Something was not alone under there. I stepped back so fast my boots slipped in the loose dirt. My flashlight jittered across the ground, beam shaking as I tried to keep it steady. 2 sets of eyes under my Volkswagen. Not 1. 2, both watching me with the stillness of something that didn't need to breathe the way I did. The fire crackled behind me, but its warmth couldn't touch the cold flooding my body. Panic wormed its way up my spine, sharp and electric. But there was another feeling mixed in, something older. Instinct, warning. A pressure deep in my gut that said, "You're not supposed to see this." I forced in a breath through my teeth, slow and silent, and took another step back. The clicking started again, light, deliberate, almost rhythmic, not coming from under the van this time, but from the trees behind it. Something else was out there. Something standing, something waiting. I felt trapped between them, seen from angles I couldn't defend. My mind raced. I needed distance. I needed a weapon better than a metal fire poker. I needed to get inside the van, get the doors locked, and figure out what the hell was closing in around me. The problem was simple. The van was 10 feet away, and something was under it. I swallowed hard. It was a bad plan. But staying where I was felt worse. I started to circle the clearing, moving sideways, keeping the fire between me and the Volkswagen. The eyes under the van tracked me with unnatural smoothness. No blink, no flinch, just a slow rotation like the head attached to them could turn farther than it should. As I reached the far arc of the clearing, I angled toward the open driver's door. My pulse hammered in my ears and sweat stung my eyes. Every step felt like it took years. My entire body tensed for anything, movement, sound, a hand reaching out from the shadows. Then the clicking stopped. Everything stopped. The forest held its breath. I didn't. I bolted. My boots pounded the dirt, and the firelight swung wildly behind me as I sprinted for the van. I felt something shift under it. Fast. Too fast. Like a predator snapping into motion, the second prey turned its back. I lunged for the driver's seat, grabbed the edge of the door, and a hand shot out from beneath the Volkswagen. Not a paw. Not a claw. A hand. Pale. Long fingers. Knuckles swollen and sharp, as if the bones were the wrong shape. It clamped around my ankle with surprising force. I slammed into the side of the van, breath knocking out of me as pain shot up my leg. I kicked instinctively, twisting, trying to break free, but the grip tightened. The skin was cold, wet, almost slimy, like the hand had been buried in mud moments before reaching for me. A second hand appeared beside the first, then a third. Multiple arms, jointed wrong, moving with insect-like precision, grabbed at my leg, my boot, my pant cuff. I screamed, a raw, involuntary sound I hadn't made since I was a kid. I reached up, grabbed the door frame, and pulled with every ounce of strength I had. The hands slipped once, just a moment, but they regrouped, claws digging into the fabric of my jeans. Something clicked under the van, louder this time, like a jaw snapping shut inches from my skin. I kicked again, hard. My heel connected with something solid. A hiss, not quite human, not quite animal, slithered out from under the van. I kicked again, and again. Finally, the grip loosened just enough for me to wrench myself free. I threw myself into the driver's seat, yanked the door shut, and slammed the lockdown with a force that made the metal rattle. Silence. Then, boom. Something slammed into the side of the van, hard enough to rock it on its suspension. I grabbed the steering wheel with white-knuckled hands, holding on as another impact hit the rear panel. The entire van shuddered, creaking like it might tip over. My breathing was ragged now, my vision blurred with adrenaline. I reached blindly for the keys, thank God I'd left them in the ignition, and twisted. The engine coughed, sputtered, then roared to life. As it vibrated beneath me, I felt something else vibrating too, clinging to the underside of the van. The weight shifted, scraping metal against metal, long, dragging movements like whatever was under there was repositioning itself. I put the van in gear, and that's when I made the mistake of looking up into the rearview mirror. A face was pressed against the back window, not human, not even close. It was elongated, almost mask-like, with skin stretched thin over angular bones. The eyes were large and glossy, reflecting the faint firelight behind me. The mouth was slack, slightly open, and inside I saw rows of uneven teeth, some too short, some too long, all wrong. It didn't blink, it didn't breathe. It just stared, as if memorizing me. I couldn't move. The engine idled beneath me, rumbling softly, but I sat paralyzed, locked in a silent standoff with whatever had found me in the Ozarks that night. Then the face did something I still don't understand. It smiled. Not a human smile, not an emotion. More like a test, stretching the skin, revealing more teeth, seeing how I reacted. My stomach twisted violently, and I slammed my foot onto the accelerator. The van lurched forward, tires spinning in the dirt, kicking up debris. The creature on the window vanished, and something scraped violently beneath me, metal screeching as the Volkswagen peeled out of the campsite. For a split second, I thought I was free, until something heavy landed on the roof. The entire frame groaned as weight pressed down, bending the thin metal inward. I ducked instinctively, gripping the wheel, trying to keep the van straight as it fishtailed on the narrow path. Branches slapped the sides, jolting me left and right. Whatever was on the roof shifted again, like crawling toward the front. The metal above my head dented, flexing downward like a hand pressing through a sheet of foil. I braced one hand against it, as if my palm could stop the thing from breaking through. The clicking returned. Right above me. Louder. Faster. Excited. I floored the accelerator, the van roaring as it tore through the trail. My headlights jittered across the trees, disorienting shapes blurring into a tunnel of green and shadow. I didn't care where the road led. I just needed distance, any distance. Then, with a suddenness that startled me, the weight on the roof shifted again, and the creature leaped from the van, disappearing into the darkness with a sound like fabric tearing. I didn't slow down, not even when the road narrowed further, not even when the trees whipped past close enough to scrape the paint, not even when tears blurred my eyes from the force of my terror. I didn't stop until I reached a service road, a paved, blessedly empty stretch that looked like salvation. I skidded onto it, breathing hard, chest heaving, hands trembling. But that's when I saw something that told me the night wasn't over. In the middle of the asphalt stood a figure, tall, thin, limbs too long, facing me, waiting. The figure didn't move, not an inch, just stood there in the center of the road, framed by my headlights like it had been carved out of the night itself. My van rolled forward another few feet before I slammed on the brakes. Gravel spit out under the tires. The engine rattled. My breath stopped somewhere high in my throat. It wasn't human. I knew that right away. And yet, something about the way it faced me, straight on, shoulders squared, posture almost mocking, felt disturbingly familiar, like it had studied the idea of a person without understanding what made one real. I kept my hands on the wheel, fingers trembling. The creature's limbs were too long, its arms hanging nearly to its knees, and its skin looked pale even in the harsh beam of the headlights. Not white, more like translucent, like a thin membrane stretched over something underneath, something shifting. The clicking started again, not from its mouth, from its chest. A vibration rippled through the creature's torso, and the clicks grew louder, faster, echoing across the pavement like something counting down. Its head tilted slowly to one side, and for a second I could have sworn its neck bent farther than bone should allow. I whispered, "Oh God." The creature took one step toward me, not fast, not lunging, just deliberate, confident, like it already knew how this would end. I threw the van into reverse. Tires screeched. The headlights swung wildly as I backed down the service road, trying to keep distance between me and the thing approaching. The creature took another step, and another, each movement precise, almost graceful, as if it weighed nothing. Then it stopped walking and started running. I've never seen anything move that fast. It covered half the distance between us in a blink, limbs stretching and contracting like a spider closing in on prey. Panic surged cold through my chest. I floored the accelerator, the van jolting violently as it lurched backward down the asphalt. My eyes flicked between the road behind me and the creature ahead. It sprinted toward me with unnatural bursts of speed, its body jolting forward in sharp mechanical motions. The clicking rose into a frenzied chatter, echoing off the trees on both sides. I swung the steering wheel hard, skidding into a turn. Tires screamed, the van fishtailed. For a heartbeat, I thought the whole thing would tip, but it slammed back onto all four wheels and shot down the connecting road. I checked the rearview mirror. The creature burst onto the pavement, stumbled for half a second, then corrected itself and began running after me again. That was the moment I realized something I still wish I didn't know. It was enjoying the chase. Branches whipped past, and the van rattled like it was about to fall apart. I kept pushing it faster, past the speed I ever trusted this old engine to handle. The forest blurred, and the roaring in my ears became a single, overwhelming sound of survival. But the creature was gaining. The clicking grew louder, closer. I could almost feel it at the back of the van, reaching for me again. And then, headlights, not mine. A pair of bright beams appeared ahead, rounding a bend too fast, barreling straight into my lane. For a split second, I thought I was hallucinating, or that the woods had twisted into some impossible loop like the creature was hurting me somewhere. But the roar of the engine was real, loud, familiar. A Ranger truck. I jerked the van aside, barely avoiding a collision as the truck skidded to a stop across the road. The driver's door flew open, and a man in uniform jumped out, flashlight raised. I nearly sobbed with relief. He yelled something, motioning for me to stop. I slammed on the brakes. The van fishtailed once more before jerking to a halt. The Ranger jogged toward me, mouth open like he was ready to demand why I was driving like a lunatic. Then he saw my face. He didn't ask a single question. Instead, he looked past me, toward the direction I'd come from, and his expression changed, tightened, drained of color. I turned. The road behind us was empty, but the clicking, it hadn't stopped. It echoed faintly from somewhere in the trees, shifting from one side to the other, like the creature was circling us just out of sight. The ranger whispered, "Get in the truck, leave the van." I didn't argue. I grabbed nothing. Not my bag, not my gear, not even the keys. I just stumbled out of the Volkswagen and ran for the passenger door of the ranger's truck. He slammed it shut behind me, sprinted back to the driver's side, and climbed in with urgency that told me he knew exactly what was out there. He didn't look at me when he spoke. His eyes stayed locked on the tree line. "You're lucky you weren't deeper in," he said. "People go missing for less than what you just saw." The truck roared forward, gravel spitting beneath us as we tore down the mountain road. The forest pressed close on both sides, black and breathing. I couldn't stop shaking. My heart had become something wild, something unrecognizable, pacing inside my chest like it wanted out. I whispered, "What was that thing?" The ranger didn't answer for a long time. His jaw clenched. His knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. Finally, he said, "Around here, they call them watchers. They don't usually cross into campsites unless they're curious." Curious. The word landed hard. My voice cracked. It touched me. That made him look at me, really look. "It followed me," I said, "under my van, on the roof. It chased me down the road." The ranger's jaw tightened even more. "They're not all the same," he said quietly. "Some mimic, some hunt, some just observe." He hesitated. "But if one smiled at you, that's the kind that learns." I felt the blood drain from my face. He didn't say anything else. Neither did I. The rest of the drive was a blur of winding roads, headlights cutting thin slices of safety through the darkness. Every time a branch snapped or wind shifted through the trees, I flinched, expecting that pale face to appear again, pressed against the glass. When we finally reached the ranger station, he insisted on walking me inside. His flashlight scanned every corner, every shadow, every inch of the ground. Only when the heavy wooden door closed behind us did I feel like I could breathe again. Inside, under the harsh, fluorescent lights, the fear didn't disappear. It settled, hardened, became something I'd have to carry. The ranger made me sit, brought me water, and didn't ask for a statement, didn't ask what I saw, didn't write anything down. Before he walked away, he said just one thing: "Don't camp alone in the Ozarks again. Not deep, not off-road, and not in a van with that much clearance underneath." Then he paused. "And if you ever hear clicking, leave immediately." I didn't sleep that night. Not in the station. Not in the motel he drove me to afterward. Not for days. My Volkswagen was recovered the next morning. The tow driver said it looked like something had clawed the underside open, but there were no prints, no blood, no hair, nothing the station could file officially. But I saw them. I felt them. And some part of me still knows they're watching. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can see that smile, thin, too wide, curious, like it learned something new that night, like it learned me. So if you ever find yourself in the Ozark forest, camping beneath those ancient trees, if the woods go silent, if the air smells like iron, if you hear clicking, leave. Don't investigate. Don't wait. Don't pretend you're imagining it. Because in the deep woods, some things are intelligent. Some things are hungry, and some things are learning faster than we ever understood. And I'll tell you this, nothing good ever comes from being the reason a cryptid becomes curious. I rolled into the southern edge of Mount Rainier National Park late in the afternoon, my old Volkswagen Westphalia rumbling like it had been holding its breath the entire climb up the winding gravel road. The fog line kissed the treetops in a way I hadn't seen in years. Low, packed, almost pressed down against the forest as if something heavy was sitting on it. I told myself it was just the cold front moving in, but the way the fog clung to the ground made me hesitate before turning off the ignition. The air felt denser than it should have for early fall. The campground, an unofficial pull-off I'd found years back on an old online forum that no longer exists, sat empty, just as I remembered. That forum had been wiped clean not long after I first visited, threads replaced with placeholder posts from bots. No record of this hidden spur road, no mention of the quiet clearing beyond the switchback. Just gone. Maybe I misremembered, but my mind held on to the memory of a single user's warning: stay above the fog line if you hear anything moving under it. I didn't believe it then. I'm not sure I believe it now. But I parked anyway, sliding into the familiar comfort of the clearing where I'd once watched the Perseids scatter across the sky. Back then, the air had smelled like warm pine and burned coffee. Tonight, it smelled like wet stone and something faintly metallic, almost like old coins pressed against damp skin. I got out, stretched my arms, and let the cold air settle against me. There was a strange quiet to the evening. No birds, no distant traffic from the valley, just the wind brushing through the branches, whispering with a static-like hiss that made the hairs on my neck stand up. It was the kind of sound that almost seems to form words before dissolving back into air. I shook it off, told myself I was just tired, just road-lagged. Long drives always left me in an off-kilter state, that fuzzy headspace where memory feels like it's slipping a little. I'd been trying to get back to camping alone, trying to reclaim that calm I used to feel before everything in my life fractured. I needed quiet. I needed space. I needed to prove to myself that I could be alone without falling apart. The fog drifted lower as I set up camp, sliding between the trees like it had intent. I found myself glancing over my shoulder more than once, half expecting to see someone standing there. Nothing moved, but the sense of being watched settled into my bones in a way I couldn't categorize. Not fear, not yet. More like anticipation, or recognition. The forest around Rainier has a way of pulling you inward, making you question whether the silence is natural or a warning you're too dull to understand. I unpacked slowly. Stove, lantern, sleeping bag. The usual routine that always brought me back into myself. But something about that night made every movement deliberate, like I was performing for an unseen audience. My Volkswagen sat behind me, its faded yellow paint almost glowing in the washed-out light as the fog clung to its windows. Sometimes when I camp in that van, I swear I hear things inside it even when I'm standing outside. Tiny settling sounds that don't match the way metal cools. While setting up the stove, I thought I heard footsteps behind me. Soft, measured, human. I froze. The wind died. The forest held its breath. When I finally turned, there was nothing there but fog swirling around a stump that hadn't been there before. I blinked hard, and the stump shifted, resolving into the shadow of a tree trunk. I told myself I was imagining things. My mind does that sometimes, fills the empty spaces with shapes I expect to see. Still, I found myself muttering aloud, a habit I picked up after too many nights alone. You're fine. You're just tired. The fog answered with a faint crackle, like static drifting through the branches. As the sun sank behind the ridge, the temperature dropped fast. The lantern cast a pale halo around my small camp, and the fog refracted the light into drifting shapes that tugged at the edges of my vision. I kept catching glimpses of movement. Something tall, something thin, just beyond the boundary of the light. Whenever I turned my head, it vanished, leaving only the impression of vertical lines fading back into darkness. I made myself dinner, though I barely tasted it. Every now and then, that metallic scent drifted across the clearing, sharp enough to sting my nostrils. I searched my memory for where I'd smelled it before, but the thought slipped away as soon as I reached for it. It felt familiar in the wrong way. Recognition without the memory behind it, like waking up from a dream you can't fully recall. By the time I finished eating, the fog had thickened into walls around the campsite. I couldn't see more than a few yards ahead, and the only sound was the faint whisper of wind and that static-like hiss that seemed to grow louder every time I acknowledged it. My Volkswagen looked like it was sinking into the gray, half swallowed by the thick blanket rolling in from the valley. I'd camped alone in plenty of places. I'd weathered storms, heard coyotes howl, listened to trees groan in winds strong enough to push the van sideways. But the silence here felt engineered, like something was absorbing the natural sounds rather than masking them. Even the river, which should have been rushing somewhere nearby, was gone. I should have left then, but I didn't. Maybe because I didn't want to admit that something was off. Maybe because the idea of turning back meant acknowledging that the unease tightening in my chest wasn't just exhaustion. Or maybe because some part of me wanted to understand why coming back to this place felt important, as if I was meant to confront something here. I climbed into the van, shut the door, and turned on the interior lights. It was a small comfort, but even that felt dimmer than usual. I sat on the edge of the bed and listened. Nothing, not even the familiar ticking of the engine cooling. The silence pressed against the windows, thick and expectant. After a while, I heard it, the faint crunch of footsteps outside, slow and rhythmic. Too slow to be an animal, too heavy to be a deer. They stopped right outside the rear window. I held my breath, waited. The footsteps didn't continue. They just hovered, like someone or something was standing there, deciding what to do next. Then the static in the wind grew louder, nearly forming a word I couldn't quite understand. Something small tapped against the window. Not a knock, not weather. A tap, human in rhythm. I wanted to look. Every instinct screamed at me to look, but another instinct, one deeper, older, told me not to. That if I met the eyes of whatever stood behind the fogged glass, something in me would break. And then from the tree line, a voice, low, ragged, carried across the clearing. You shouldn't be here. It came from behind the fog. It came from nowhere. It came from everywhere. And then the tapping stopped. The static faded. And the forest went silent again. Shaking, I forced myself to breathe. Maybe it was the wind playing tricks. Maybe it was someone else camping nearby, though I hadn't seen another car for miles. Maybe I was finally losing grip on the part of me that trusted what I saw, what I heard, what I remembered. But when I finally gathered the courage to slide the curtain aside, there were footprints in the fog-damp soil beneath the window. Just one set, leading toward the tree line, and none leading away. I stepped out of the van because I couldn't stand the feeling of sitting still while something waited just beyond the glass. The air hit me like a wall, cold, wet, and unnervingly still. My breath fogged immediately, dissolving into the thicker fog that hovered only a foot above the ground, as if the earth itself were exhaling something I wasn't supposed to inhale. The footprints hadn't vanished. They were clearer now, pressed deep into the damp soil like whoever made them had stood in place for a long time. The shape of the prints bothered me, not the size, but the angle. They pointed toward the van, perfectly straight, as if someone had walked up with mechanical precision and then frozen. There was no wandering, no hesitation in the stride, just a direct approach, a stillness, and then nothing. I crouched down, wanting to touch the soil to feel if it was still warm, but something in me recoiled. Instead, I scanned the tree line, half expecting someone to step out, someone with a flashlight or a headlamp, someone who would call out, "Hey, sorry, didn't mean to scare you." Nobody did. The fog swallowed the first few rows of trees, and beyond that, I could see only shifting silhouettes, tall, vertical shapes that might have been trunks or might have been something standing between them. None of them moved, but none felt entirely still either. I backed up until my shoulder touched the van's cool metal, grounding myself. Faint static rode the wind again, threading through the branches above. It had a pulse to it now, soft, irregular, like the pattern you hear when you're scanning between radio stations. I closed my eyes for a second, steadying my breathing. You're imagining it. You're tired. This is sensory overload from driving too long. But the part of me that used to trust logic felt bruised, like something was pressing against it from the inside, reshaping it. When I opened my eyes, I saw the flicker, a light, not bright, but distinct, flaring deep in the fog between the trees. For a moment, I thought it was another camper with a lantern. Then it blinked again, too quickly, too rhythmically. 3 short blinks, pause, 1 long. The exact same flashing pattern I'd seen years ago on a map posted to a backcountry hiking blog, one of those strange GPS anomalies people speculate about until the thread gets deleted. I'd forgotten about it until now. Or maybe I hadn't. Maybe some part of me recognized the pattern the moment it flickered. The flashes stopped abruptly, like someone had cupped a hand over the light. I swallowed hard. My heart was hammering in a way that felt out of sync, like it was trying to match the static hum instead of a normal rhythm. I wanted to turn on the van, drive away, get back to the main road, even if I had to plow through the fog. But fear pinned me to the spot, not fear of leaving, but fear of turning my back to the trees. Then I heard it again, the voice, not loud, not close, but clear enough to cut through the fog. You didn't see me. It wasn't threatening. It wasn't reassuring. It was stated like a fact, like a reminder. My mouth went dry. I scanned the fog, the trees, the footprints. No movement, no figure. But the voice, it felt familiar, like someone I'd met once, long ago, who remembered me, even though I couldn't place the memory. The air shifted. A cold drift curled around my legs, rising like a tide, the fog line climbing. I retreated quickly, opening the van door and climbing inside, locking it with a sharp click that felt pathetically small against the surrounding stillness. The moment the door shut, the interior felt even darker, like something outside had sucked the light out of the windows. My lantern flickered twice. Then the static hum moved closer. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the sliding side window. I couldn't see anything except swirling gray, but the fog wasn't drifting naturally anymore. It pushed, slow, deliberate, across the glass, leaving thin streaks behind as if something brushed along the outside. Tapping started again, not in the same place. This time it came from the side door. 3 taps. Pause. 2 more. A deliberate rhythm. Almost communicative. My throat tightened. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. The tapping repeated, softer now, like someone trying to coax me into responding. Then came a whisper, so close it sounded like it slid between the window seals. "Do you remember the trail?" My pulse stuttered. The trail? Years ago, the first time I camped in this clearing, I'd wandered toward a faint footpath at dusk, following a drawn symbol on a laminated map someone had left in the van's glove box before I bought it. A crude circle with 3 vertical lines under it. A symbol I'd seen repeated in graffiti under an old bridge near Yakima. The same symbol carved into a bench at a state campground in Oregon. The same symbol etched faintly into the back panel of my van, hidden under the insulation when I'd repaired it last summer. I had forgotten about that map until this exact moment, until the whisper pulled it from whatever corner of my mind I'd shoved it into. But that trail hadn't existed when I'd looked for it again in daylight. The forest floor had been undisturbed. No footpath, no clearing, nothing. I felt the pressure of a memory rising, walking down a narrow path flanked by trees, feeling the temperature drop with every step, hearing something breathing in the fog, but the specifics were smeared, distorted, like someone had wiped sections of the memory clean. The tapping grew more insistent, almost impatient. My hand hovered over the curtain. I didn't want to look. I knew, deep down, I didn't want to see whatever waited on the other side. But something inside me tugged, urging me forward with a soft dread that felt personal. When I finally pulled the curtain back, slow, careful, the fog parted just enough to reveal a silhouette standing less than 10 feet from the van. Tall, unmoving, almost blending with the trees, except its proportions were wrong. Narrow shoulders, elongated outline, as if stretched by the fog itself. I couldn't see a face, no details. Just shape. A shape I recognized in the worst possible way. I had seen that outline before. Not here, but somewhere in memory's blind spots. The gaps I never questioned, the nights I woke up certain someone had been standing in my doorway, the hikes where I thought I glimpsed a figure further up the trail only for it to vanish when I blinked. It hadn't followed me. It had always been there. Watching. Waiting. The silhouette shifted slightly, like it leaned in without moving its feet, and the static hum intensified until it buzzed inside my skull, forming a single phrase that I felt more than heard. "You came back." For a moment, the fog thinned enough that I thought I saw something in its hand. 3 faint vertical lines glowing like soft embers. The symbol The same one from the erased forum posts, the bridge graffiti, the map from the van, the carved bench. And then the fog swallowed the figure again. I stumbled backward, slamming the curtains shut. My breath turned ragged, the thin air burning in my throat. I reached for the keys, fingers trembling. But before I could turn the ignition, another sound cut through the static. Not tapping, not footsteps. A slow, drawn-out dragging across the outside wall of the van, circling from the side door toward the rear. A full rotation. Then silence. A silence so complete it felt intentional. I gripped the wheel, staring into the darkness beyond the windshield, terrified that the fog would thin enough for me to see the silhouette standing directly in front of me. It didn't, but something else happened instead. The engine turned on. By itself. The engine coughed to life with a weak shudder that vibrated through the frame of the van. I hadn't touched the key. It was still on the counter behind me, exactly where I'd dropped it when I panicked earlier. For a second, my mind went blank, like my thoughts were trying to scatter to the farthest corners of my skull. The Volkswagen's old engine never started clean. Not without coaxing, not without a pump of the pedal or a twist of the ignition that always required a little luck. But it idled now. Smooth. Too smooth. I stared at the dashboard, at the unmoving key slot, at the trembling needle of the RPM gauge. My first instinct was to reach for the keys anyway, but something held me back. The air inside the van felt electrified, charged with a faint vibration I could feel in my teeth. It was the same sensation you get standing under high-voltage lines, an invisible hum threading into your bones. Then the headlights flicked on. Bright white beams cut through the fog, carving two perfect tunnels of light that ended abruptly only a few yards ahead. And in that pale glow, the fog line seemed to react, rippling, folding back, revealing just enough to make me wish I hadn't looked at all. There were shapes in it. Tall, thin shapes. At first, I thought I was seeing more trees, but the trees didn't stand that close together, and they didn't lean slightly forward, as if studying the van. The silhouettes had a human outline, but stretched unnaturally vertical, like someone had pulled them upward by invisible threads. My chest tightened. I reached out a shaking hand and hit the headlights switch, trying to turn them off. Nothing happened. I flipped it again. The beams stayed locked in place. The static in the air thickened, vibrating across the van's metal shell. The engine revved on its own. Not a lot, just a subtle growl, like something inside it was testing its power. I scrambled for the keys, grabbing them with shaking fingers, and jammed them into the ignition out of instinct. But when I tried to turn the engine off, the key wouldn't budge. It was locked in place, rigid as stone. Something shifted outside. Not footsteps this time. A ripple across the fog. As if something was circling the van again, slow, purposeful. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my fingers went numb. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to slam the van into gear and tear out of the clearing, even if it meant driving blind through a wall of fog. But I couldn't move. I couldn't take my eyes off the shapes standing in the headlight beams. One of them leaned closer, just enough for the silhouette to distort, like a person tilting forward in curiosity. My breath caught. For a moment, I thought I saw the faintest outline of a face, but it was wrong. Features blurred, rearranging, as if the fog couldn't decide what it was supposed to look like. Then a flicker of light sparked near its chest. 3 vertical lines. The same faint ember-like glow I'd seen earlier. The symbol. The one etched into the back panel of my van. The one on the erased map. The one that kept showing up in places I could never fully explain. The symbol pulsed once faintly, a signal, a recognition, or a warning. The shape stepped back into the fog, swallowed instantly. The others didn't move at all. Then something happened that made my stomach drop. The van shifted, not forward, not backward, down, like something underneath had pressed its weight against the undercarriage. The metal frame groaned softly, the suspension dipping ever so slightly. I jerked upward instinctively, feet lifting off the floor like I could keep myself from being dragged through it. For a moment, everything inside me fractured between logic and fear. Part of me tried to rationalize. Maybe the van settled. Maybe the cold made the springs shift. But the deeper part, the part that had been whispering warnings since the moment the fog rolled in, knew better. Something was under the van, pressing up, feeling the shape of it. The static surged, sharp enough to sting my ears. I clapped my hands over them, wincing, and the van lurched again, harder this time. Not enough to throw me, but enough to force a small gasp from my throat. The headlights flickered, dimmed, brightened. Then everything went silent. The engine cut. The lights died. The humming inside my skull dropped into a low, trembling echo, and for the first time all night I heard something real. Breathing. Not mine, not human. Deep, slow inhalations exhaled from somewhere along the side of the van, so close it vibrated the metal wall beside me. It reminded me of standing beside a massive animal at a wildlife reserve once, feeling its breath through the fencing. Except this wasn't warm. The air pressing through the van's seams was icy, carrying that same metallic scent that had followed me since the moment I parked here. I slid off the bed slowly, careful not to make the van shift again. My hand brushed the floor and I felt something cold. At first I thought it was condensation, but when I lifted my fingers they were clean. Dry. Cold without moisture, like touching the inside of a refrigerator. The breathing shifted locations, moving toward the rear doors, pausing, then drifting to the opposite side. It wasn't walking, it was gliding. A smooth transition of sound, like whatever was out there didn't need the ground to move. A faint scrape brushed against the metal. Then another, high-pitched, slow, like claws testing the frame. I stumbled backward, hitting the cabinet behind me, and something small fell onto the floor with a muffled clink. I reached down blindly, fingers closing around it. My chest tightened when I realized what it was. The old laminated map, the one I thought I had thrown out last year, the one with the hand-drawn symbol, except it wasn't laminated anymore. The plastic was torn, melted along the edges like it had been pressed to fire. I unfolded it with trembling hands. The symbol was still there, but something new had been added. The 3 vertical lines were crossed at the top with a 4th mark, a jagged line slashing through them. And below it, written in a shaky hand I didn't recognize, were 3 words: "Do not follow." A whisper brushed across the back of my neck. Too close. Impossible. They always follow. I whipped around, heart slamming against my ribs. Nobody was there, but the air behind me held a shape, a faint distortion like heat rising off pavement. I backed away slowly, gripping the map so hard it creased. The distortion pulsed, then dissolved. The breathing outside stopped abruptly. Silence fell. A perfect, unnatural silence. Then, knock. Not tapping, not scraping. A slow, deliberate knock on the sliding side door. 3 knocks. A pause, and then in the same rhythm, "You came back." I froze. Because this time, it wasn't a whisper. It was my own voice, repeating back to me through the metal. I didn't move. I couldn't. Hearing my own voice echo back through the metal door hollowed something out inside me, like a piece of memory being scooped away. The sound was unmistakably mine, down to the brittle edge I got whenever fear tightened my throat. But it carried something else underneath, a strain, like it was being pushed through static, distorted at the edges. The van's thin walls felt suddenly fragile, as if whatever stood outside could peel them open like foil if it wanted to. 3 more knocks followed, softer, almost playful. My voice again. "Let me in." The air inside the van dropped in temperature so sharply I could see my breath, each exhale rising like smoke toward the ceiling. I stepped backward until my calves hit the edge of the bed, trying to slow my breathing, trying to control something, anything, in this moment that made no logical sense. It didn't feel like a hallucination. It didn't feel like panic. It felt like something familiar, pretending to be familiar. I held the ruined map against my chest, the melted edges curling inward like something had burned it from the inside. The symbol, 3 vertical lines crossed at the top, looked different now that I stared at it under the dim lantern light. The lines weren't perfectly straight. They bent slightly inward, as if pulled toward a center point. And the slash cutting through them wasn't a single mark, it was layered, scraped, as if someone had drawn the warning repeatedly, needing to write it enough times that the message couldn't be misunderstood. Do not follow. My voice outside shifted tone. Lower now. Calm. But you did. A soft drag scraped along the length of the side door, then up toward the window. I watched the curtain tremble as something traced its way around the frame. Not scratching. Feeling. A probing touch. Then the fog pressed itself against the window again, flattening as if something leaned into it. I saw no face. No features. Just density. Fog thick enough to be a shape, staring in. I took a step back, then another, until my shoulders hit the rear doors. I kept my eyes on the curtain in front of me, half expecting it to pull inward. The breathing returned, not outside this time, but something resonating through the metal, like the van was inhaling. Static threaded through the silence again, a low vibration under my feet. The lantern flickered. The cabinets rattled just once, like a fist had struck the roof. My survival instincts finally kicked through the paralysis. Every cell in my body screamed at me to leave, to get out of the van, even if the fog was waiting to swallow me whole. I grabbed the rear door handle. It was ice cold, too cold. My fingers burned from the freeze, but it turned. The latch clicked. I pushed the door open enough to slip through, expecting resistance, hands grabbing, fog thickening, something blocking my exit. But nothing stopped me. The door swung out silently into the clearing. The fog behind the van was thinner, drifting like normal fog should. I didn't question why. I took the opening and ran. Not far, just past the first line of trees, instinct pushing me toward what felt like depth and cover. The forest swallowed me instantly, the fog wrapping around my ankles but not rising. It stayed low, like it was avoiding the trees. I turned back toward the clearing. From this angle, the van looked wrong. Tilted slightly, like one corner had sunk deeper than the others. The shadows around it didn't match the lantern glow leaking through the curtains. They leaned inward, converging under the van, pooling in a way shadows shouldn't. Something shifted under the chassis, a slow, fluid movement. The metal dipped again. A faint glow flickered inside the fog beneath it, 3 vertical lines pulsing once. The same symbol, the same glow. Then from somewhere deeper in the woods behind me, a voice cut through the silence. Hey, don't go near the fog line. A whisper, sharp with warning. Human. I spun around, heart exploding into my throat. A figure stood between 2 tree trunks, barely visible in the dark. Just the outline of a jacket, a hood, the slight reflection from the strip on their backpack. They held a flashlight pointed down toward the moss, never at me. I opened my mouth, desperate for words. Who are you? What's happening? What did you see? But the figure raised a hand to silence me. Their voice cracked as they spoke again. It remembers you. It doesn't forget the ones who leave. Something inside me twisted. The ones who leave. My mind flashed with that half memory I'd been avoiding, walking down a trail that didn't exist on any map, the temperature dropping, the sound of my own footsteps, echoing wrong. A feeling of being watched, followed, but I had come back that first time. I had returned to the clearing, shaken and confused, and I had never spoken about it again. I'd written a note to myself once on my phone, a single sentence, "Don't sleep near Rainier again." When I checked years later, the file was empty. Blank, like it had erased itself. The figure stepped forward slightly, staying in the darkness between the trees. Did it speak in your voice yet? My blood went cold. I nodded without meaning to, the movement jerky. Their breath caught, a sound of dread, recognition. Then their flashlight flickered. Once, twice, died. I didn't see them move. I just saw their outline collapse backward as if yanked by something in the dark. Not the fog, not the wind, something with intention. I stumbled back, gripping a tree trunk to keep from falling. My pulse thundered so loudly I couldn't hear anything else, but then it cut out. Silence again. The forest around me felt suddenly hollow, empty, like the trees were listening. I forced my legs to move, staying low, keeping the van in my peripheral vision as I tried to edge away from the clearing. Every step felt too loud, too slow, my breathing too heavy. I needed to get back to the road, any road, even gravel, even a deer path. The forest was mapped in my head from earlier that afternoon, but something felt off, angles that didn't match, distances that stretched longer than they should. The slope I remembered descending on my way in wasn't where it should have been. It was like the forest had rotated around me. Behind me, the van's horn blared. Not once. Continuously. A long, unbroken scream of sound. I whipped around. The headlights had turned back on, blasting through the fog, illuminating the exact spot where I stood between the trees. No one was in the driver's seat, but the van was idling again, and the passenger door was slowly, deliberately opening, as if inviting me back, as if it wanted me inside. Then I heard my voice again, inside the forest this time. Closer. Come back. We haven't finished the trail. The trees seemed to pull tighter around me, and the fog began rising again. I kept my hand pressed against the inside of the Volkswagen's sliding door, holding myself still, holding myself together, even as every instinct inside me screamed to run. But something about the air outside had changed. The world felt too quiet, as if someone had muted the forest. No insects, no wind, nothing but the soft thrum of my own heartbeat echoing inside my ears like I was underwater. I raised my head and looked out the front windshield. My breath caught in my throat. A faint outline stood at the far end of the dirt road, right where the trees pinched the world into a tunnel. It didn't move. It didn't sway. It just stood there like it had been carved from the air itself. I couldn't make out a face. Couldn't make out clothes. Just a shape, darker than the dark around it, like a human-shaped absence. For a moment, I thought maybe it was a tree, just one I hadn't noticed earlier. But then it shifted. Barely, subtly, like it leaned forward the smallest amount. My blood went cold. I slid back into the driver's seat and quietly turned the ignition halfway, careful not to activate the headlights. My fingers trembled on the key. I didn't want to spook whatever that was, or worse, confirm to myself that it was looking straight at me. The dashboard flickered to life in a dim amber glow. The Volkswagen's old interior lights hummed softly, giving me just enough to see my own reflection hovering faintly over the glass. I stared through it at the figure, still there. I let out a slow breath and eased the key the rest of the way. The engine coughed once, then twice, then rumbled awake far louder than I wanted. I flinched. The figure at the end of the road shifted again, this time unmistakably. Its outline elongated, like it was stepping forward. No, walking forward. I slammed the gear into reverse and the van lurched backward, tires skidding through damp soil. I twisted in my seat to look behind me, gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles burned. The VW bounced as I rolled straight over the little mound of hard earth that earlier looked like a fire ring. I winced, but didn't stop. I backed up fast, half blind, until the van's rear hit a patch of loose gravel and jerked sideways. I corrected, breathing hard, heart pounding. When I shifted into drive, the figure was closer, much closer, far too close for how slowly it had seemed to move. It stood now just beyond the first set of trees that bordered my campsite. 20 feet away, maybe less. I didn't think. I floored it. The Volkswagen surged forward, engine whining, tires spitting dirt. I kept my eyes locked dead ahead, refusing to check my mirrors, refusing to see if that thing stepped into the road behind me. The road twisted. Branches scraped both sides of the van like hands dragging across metal. I drove faster than the road deserved, faster than my headlights could catch up once I finally dared turn them on. They cut a narrow beam through the trees, but everything outside that cone was pitch, like the forest swallowed light instead of reflecting it. I caught glimpses of movement, shadows darting between trees, indirect and impossible to track. Maybe they were nothing. Maybe my adrenaline made every shaking branch look alive. Maybe, or maybe that thing wasn't alone. I didn't slow down. After what felt like far too long, the forest finally loosened, the road leveled. A sign materialized on the right with reflective letters washed pale by my headlights. I didn't bother reading it. I kept going until the road spit me out onto the highway, an empty two-lane stretch that cut through the night like a vein. Only then did I ease off the gas. I rested my forehead against the steering wheel and breathed, my breath fogging the old plastic in slow, shaky clouds. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't overtired. Something unnatural was waiting at that old campsite, watching, and no amount of rationalizing was going to wash the fear out of my bones. But as the seconds passed, a new discomfort crawled through me, one quieter, deeper, more unsettling than the fear. Something was off. I lifted my head and looked around. The highway signs were wrong. I'd driven this stretch before earlier that afternoon on my way in. I remembered a mile marker near a curve. I remembered a sign warning about elk migration. I remembered the road gently collapsing on the right shoulder from an early season flood. None of those things were here. The asphalt looked newer, straighter. The reflectors in the middle were spaced differently. Even the sound of my tires humming across the surface felt unfamiliar, like I was driving on a road the state hadn't built yet. A strange pressure squeezed behind my ears, like altitude sickness mixed with the feeling of standing up too fast. My heartbeat, which had just begun to settle, stuttered again. I slowed the van, letting it coast at 20 miles an hour, scanning the sides of the highway for any kind of marker. Any number, any name, nothing. Just the road stretching out into the dark like an endless strip of static. I needed to pull myself together. My senses were fried. My mind was racing too fast, like it was grabbing at shadows and stitching meaning into them. Keep driving. Get to the nearest town. Regroup. I straightened the wheel, exhaled, and picked up speed again. 5 minutes passed. Then 10, then 15. Not a single sign, not a single turnout, not a single oncoming car. The forest on either side of me felt like it was tightening again, even though the trees stood much farther back from the asphalt than they had on the dirt road. I felt watched, not by a figure now, but by the road itself, like it was something alive, stretching itself on purpose, keeping me moving forward and forward and forward without an exit. Then the headlights caught something ahead. A shape, small, metallic, sitting on the side of the road. My chest tightened. It was a Volkswagen hubcap, old, rusted, resting perfectly upright, leaning against a reflective marker post. My foot hovered over the brake. I hadn't hit anything. I hadn't driven this way before. There was no reason at all, why my exact make and model of hubcap would be sitting upright on a deserted highway I didn't recognize. I eased to a stop. The engine ticked softly in the quiet. I stared at the hubcap and noticed something painted faintly on the road just beyond it. A number. Not a mile marker, not a highway designation, just a number, handwritten in white paint, slanted like someone scrawled it hurriedly. 44. My pulse hammered painfully, the same way it had when I saw the figure at the end of the campsite road. I didn't know why the number terrified me so deeply, only that it did, that it struck some part of my brain I didn't understand, like a memory I didn't know I had trying to surface. Then the headlights flickered. Once. Twice. The van shuddered. The interior lights all pulsed dimly, like a wave of static washed through the wiring. And then I heard it. The sound that hadn't belonged anywhere in the forest. The sound that followed me from the moment the figure appeared. A soft, whispering hiss. Not outside, inside the van, right behind me. I used to think Glacier National Park was just cold mountains and quiet beauty. That was before I learned beauty can hide teeth. Before I understood that silence in the wilderness isn't peace, it's patience. Waiting, measuring you. My name is Andrew Keller. I'm 37 now, and I've lived out of an RV for most of the last 5 years. People romanticize this lifestyle. Mountain sunsets, good coffee, waking up to deer walking past your campsite. And a lot of the time, that's true. But there's another side to living out here. A darker silence that creeps in once the sun dips behind the ridges. A feeling that isn't adventure or awe, but the instinct of prey. I first drove into Glacier with the arrogance only a seasoned traveler gets. I thought I'd seen it all. I'd camped through desert nights where the wind screamed like voices in mourning. I'd parked in thick southern forests where coyotes circled the RV in the dark. I'd even stayed in a ghost town RV park in Nevada that still had laundry hanging on the lines. Nothing had beaten me yet. So Glacier? Just more trees, more stars, more postcards waiting to be framed. At least, that's what I told myself as I passed the sign welcoming me into the park. Its brown posts scratched and scarred like something had been clawing for a long time. I chose a campground tucked deeper into the west side, the kind more popular among long-term campers and backpackers. The ranger who checked me in looked like he hadn't slept in a week. Pale, eyes like he kept remembering something he desperately wanted to forget. When he handed me the permit, he didn't let go right away. "You're alone?" he asked. "Yeah," I smiled like it was some badge of honor. "Just me." His fingers tightened. "If you see anything odd, don't leave your RV." I laughed it off. Standard scare tactic for responsible camping, right? But his face didn't change. No grin, no just kidding, just a warning, the kind that lives in someone's veins. By late afternoon, fog was thickening along the tree line. The peaks were distant shadows. The air smelled like wet stone and something metallic, like pennies on your tongue. A storm hadn't rolled in. The air was still, but the clouds looked heavy, almost purposeful in the way they moved down toward the earth. I set up camp in one of the more remote spots. Pine needles layered the ground so deep that each footstep sank soundlessly. It was peaceful, I kept insisting to myself. Peaceful. There were other campers around, but distant. Glimpses of an RV roof through trees, muffled voices. Enough to know I wasn't alone. Not enough to feel like I could rely on someone if something happened. I cooked a simple dinner, ate outside under the first sparkles of emerging stars, and let the cold night wrap around me. Glacier nights are sharp, they feel like a warning. I was washing my dishes when I heard footsteps behind me. Crunching softness, not twigs breaking, but weight shifting carefully across pine needles. I turned immediately, expecting a deer. Nothing. Just the long shadows of trees reaching like fingers. Animals avoid humans at night when they can. Whatever was there wanted me to hear it. I finished quickly and ducked into my RV, locked the door, told myself I was being dramatic. But when night fully came, silence fell with an edge, too quiet, like the forest had turned off the world. I lay in bed with my phone dimly lighting the ceiling, listening. It was that kind of quiet where your heartbeat becomes a threat, too loud, too exposed. I finally drifted into a light sleep, only to wake up to a sound that vibrated through the floor. A single knock. Not on the door, on the RV's undercarriage. I froze, pulse thundering, breaths so shallow they almost didn't exist. Another knock, deliberate, like someone tapping a message into the metal beneath me. I forced myself to move toward the window, pulling aside the blind just enough to see outside. The campsite was empty, black. The trees stood perfectly still, unmoving, like they were waiting too. I should have left right then. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to drive until the mountains were behind me. But ego is powerful, and stupidity hides well inside curiosity. I stayed awake, gripping a flashlight until dawn painted the tops of the trees. Then something else, my cooler, sitting outside the door, was gone. Not dragged, not tipped over, just gone. My footprints from the night before led to the spot where it should have been, and nothing else disturbed the ground. I searched around, maybe 50 yards out, found it eventually, placed neatly beside a distant tree. Lid snapped shut, no teeth marks, no scratches, nothing taken, like someone carried it, someone who wanted me to know they could. Still, I convinced myself that maybe a bear had dragged it. It was easier to believe in claws than hands. The ranger passed through later that morning, checking permits. His eyes flicked to the cooler far from camp. He didn't question it. Instead, he said quietly, "They always start small." I frowned. What does? He scanned the tree line before leaning in, voice barely louder than leaves brushing air. "You might hear whispers tonight or footsteps. Whatever you do, don't answer them." I laughed, as if fear could be outrun with humor. But inside, I wondered what he'd seen or heard. The day was picture perfect. Glacial blue waters in the distance, mountains slicing into the clouds, sunlight filtering green through the pines, a paradise made of ice and ancient stone. But even in daylight, I caught myself glancing over my shoulder. too often feeling eyes on me. I hiked a trail nearby, but only a short way. After all the ranger's warnings, I wasn't eager to wander too far alone. And that's when I noticed something that stopped me dead. Boot prints. Human. Fresh. And heading toward my camp. Not from a marked trail, not from the direction of anyone else's sight. They emerged from the thickest part of the woods, walked straight toward my RV, and stopped right at the steps to my door. But there were no prints leaving, no backtracking. It was as if whoever made them walked up to the RV and then disappeared. Or went inside. That night, I checked every lock 3 times, shut every blind, turned off every light except one small lantern over the table. My RV suddenly felt too fragile, like a tin can in the middle of a predator's den. Wind brushed against the siding, making it groan like something shifting its weight. I tried to read, tried to distract myself, but every page blurred. Then the footsteps returned. Not underneath this time. This time, they circled. Slowly. Heel first, then toe. Crunch. Pause. Crunch. I stared at the door as the sound reached it right outside. My breath caught, my muscles locked. If anyone tried the handle, I wasn't sure I could even scream. Silence. Long enough to believe it was over. Then, tap, 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 knuckles against the metal door. My blood iced, there was no voice, no raspy whisper, just that tapping like someone testing the thickness of the door, seeing how much stood between us. I knew I should stay quiet. The ranger's warning echoed in my mind like a mantra. But silence turned into terror when I thought I heard a breath on the other side. A slow inhale, then the faintest exhale fogging the narrow window. I curled down below the line of the window, gripping the flashlight like a weapon, counting every second until morning. I didn't sleep, not even for a moment. And before dawn light returned, the tapping stopped, replaced by something far worse. A whisper, right outside the wall beside my head. Not angry, not mocking, just my name, Andrew. Almost gentle, like someone who missed me. I didn't make a sound, didn't blink, didn't move, because now I understood whatever was out there knew me, and it wasn't leaving. The whisper slid through the walls like smoke. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The soft familiarity of it turned my lungs to stone. I pressed my palms against my mouth to keep from gasping. And in that frozen silence, something scraped the exterior. Slow and deliberate, dragging along the siding like a fingernail across a coffin lid. Then, stillness again. It's incredible what the mind will do in darkness. You start bargaining with yourself, telling your instincts they're wrong. You force your fear into imaginary explanations because the truth is too big to fit inside your skull. Maybe it was a branch. Maybe a hiker wandered too far from their camp. Maybe the wind whistled strangely. But I wasn't that good at lying to myself. Not anymore. I waited for daylight like a drowning man waits for air. When sun finally bled through the blinds, I cracked the door open. My heart sank as soon as I looked down. Around the RV, tracing its full perimeter, footprints. Human, bare. The kind where you could see the arch each toe. The prints were darker, pressed deep as if whatever made them was heavier than a person should be. They circled again and again, like pacing or stalking. And from the direction the trail led, they emerged from the woods. My woods, the ones inches from my window all night. I walked the perimeter, following that looping trail until something else stopped me cold. Under the bedroom window, where I'd heard my name whispered, the dirt was disturbed, scooped out like someone had knelt there for a long time. A depression shaped like knees and 2 hands pressed into the soil. It had been right beneath me, watching, waiting. I forced myself to breathe. Not deeply, just enough to stay conscious. That morning, the ranger came by again, same slow walk, same hollow stare. He seemed to already know the answer before asking, "Sleep well?" I didn't even try to hide the tremor in my voice. "Someone came to my RV last night." His face hardened, not shocked but resigned. "It didn't talk to you, did it?" I swallowed. It knew my name. He closed his eyes as if confirming his worst fear. Then he stepped closer, speaking low, voice trembling with a truth he hated carrying. "It wants attention. When you acknowledge it, it doesn't stop." That should have been the end of discussion, the cue for me to pack up and move on. But fear does something strange to your judgment. It narrows your thoughts until only one question survives. Why me? How did it know my name? I demanded. The ranger looked over his shoulder at the tree line, like it might overhear. His voice shrank. It always knows. That's how it begins. Begins what? He didn't answer. Instead, he told me something worse. If you want to leave, you can't wait until night. It follows you in the dark. A gust of wind rustled the branches behind him. He flinched, then backed away. I'll check on you this afternoon. If you're still here, stay inside after sunset. Don't speak to what sounds like a person. Don't acknowledge its voice. And for God's sake, don't open the door. Then he walked off, boots moving faster than before. I stood there feeling like a child abandoned in a forest full of fangs. I spent the day trying to calm myself, telling my mind to stop inventing monsters. But the evidence wasn't imaginary. Physical prints, a missing cooler, a whispered name. Something was here, something intelligent. Desperation forced me to test reality. I decided to walk a little deeper into the woods behind my campsite to see if there were other footprints or signs of a person living out there. I followed the barefoot trail. It wound between pines, pressed deeper into the earth where soil turned damp. Then, the prints changed. They stretched, the heel elongated, toes spaced wider. Each step looked heavier, as if whatever made them was growing, warping into something that didn't belong among humans. The trail led to a split in the trees where the ground was moss-covered, soft, untouched. The prints ended abruptly, as if the owner of the feet had simply vanished into the air. I backed away, slow and measured, never turning my back until camp was in sight. By afternoon, a different ranger replaced the one who'd spoken to me earlier. She looked younger, with a polite smile that didn't hide her curiosity. "Everything okay at your site?" she asked casually. I was hesitant. Saying the words made them real. But I needed validation that I wasn't losing my mind. "Someone's been coming here at night," I said, barefoot, whispering through the walls, calling my name. Her smile melted off her face. She didn't laugh or question me. Instead, she scanned the woods exactly the same way the other ranger had, like she expected something to step out at any moment. "You should move closer to the main loop," she suggested. "People sleep easier there." She wanted to help, but fear shimmered behind her eyes, like she knew moving wouldn't make a difference. Still, I agreed. Fear convinced me anything was safer than staying. But when I tried to start my RV, the engine sputtered, grinding, coughing like it was choking on ice. I checked everything, battery lines, fuel, no reason it shouldn't start. It had been fine yesterday. The ranger helped me look it over but shook her head. "It's not mechanical," she whispered. "Sometimes it just won't let you leave." "What do you mean, it?" I demanded. She stepped back. I'm sorry. I can't." Glacier Rangers, normally the most knowledgeable, confident people in the park, looked terrified. That's when you understand the wilderness is not the enemy. Something inside it is. Night approached faster than I wanted. The horizon swallowed the light early, turning everything cold blue and shadowed. Every instinct told me to run, but the RV refused to start. I was trapped. I locked myself inside again. All lights off this time, except one, a tiny nightlight near the floor. I thought darkness would maybe keep it disinterested. I was wrong. It waited until the moon rose, until the forest was awake with hidden movement. Then the footsteps returned, not slow anymore. Urgent, heavy, pacing, faster, faster, desperate, like it wanted inside. I pressed my back against the door as if my weight would stop whatever was outside. The walls rattled from the force of each circling step. Then, silence. A silence so complete it pressed against my skull. Until something scratched the door, a light, rhythmic scraping like a nail dragged slowly downward. The metal protested with a low whine. I clenched my teeth, eyes shut tight. Then the voice again. But this time, not gentle, this time closer. Right behind the door. "Andrew, open it." The way it said my name sounded wrong, stretched, like someone learning how to speak with a mouth that wasn't theirs. The words were shaped by hunger. My voice betrayed me. A tiny gasp slipped out. Immediately, the thing outside responded, laughing, soft, delighted, as if it finally got what it wanted. The handle trembled. I lunged and grabbed it, holding the lock in place with my entire body weight. I felt it twist under my palm, cold metal growing colder. My muscles shook. The door shook. Then it stopped. Breathing resumed outside, slow, heavy breaths fogging the window's lower edge. I stared at the glass and saw a smear, a long trail where something had pressed its forehead or cheek. I didn't dare look higher. I didn't want to see its eyes. Minutes passed like hours before I managed to crawl away from the door, backing toward the bedroom. I kept the flashlight pointed, hand shaking. Then I heard it move again, not outside. Underneath me, the scraping returned. Louder now, aggressive, like claws tearing through insulation. I stumbled backward onto the bed, shaking so hard the blankets rustled. If it tore through the floor, there would be nothing between us. No door to brace, no window to avoid. Just me, cornered. The walls groaned under pressure. The RV rocked slightly. A jolt ran through the frame, and something whispered through the floor. Let me in. Not asking anymore. Promising. Demanding. I stayed awake all night again, paralyzed. And when morning finally came, things were different. Every window blind was open. I hadn't touched them. And the dirt under the bedroom window, freshly disturbed again, had a message traced into it with a stick. You're not leaving. I staggered outside into the cold morning light, my breath shaking in short clouds. The message dug into the earth looked almost playful, like a child scribbling a warning they didn't understand. But the indentations beneath, the knee prints, the hand prints, were deep, too deep. It had been there again while I lay awake, pretending stillness could save me. I stared into the trees, every branch seeming to tilt toward me, like the whole forest was leaning in, listening. I thought about the ranger's face, the first one, how he looked like a man who had witnessed too many people stay too long, too many who believed daylight could erase the night. I knew I had to leave, now, before dusk, before it came back hungry from the dark. I forced myself into motion, shutting the RV door behind me, locking it, though it felt useless now. I found the ranger station a quarter-mile up the road, terrified footsteps crunching on the path, eyes scanning the forest for the shape that fit those prints. When I arrived, the first ranger wasn't there, just the younger one, the one whose friendliness broke under fear. You're still here, she whispered, no attempt at a greeting. Her voice held something between pity and panic. The RV won't start, I said, breathless. It was here again. It left a message. Her hand rose to her mouth, the gesture of someone who knows exactly what you mean, but wishes to God she didn't. I'll call maintenance, she said quickly. Then slower. Do you want to wait in here? Those words were the first lifeline I'd heard since I got here. Inside the station, the walls felt thick, the air warmer. But safety is a fragile illusion. Even four walls can feel like thin paper when something is thinking about you, watching you. The maintenance guy arrived in a small utility truck. A big man, calm, beard streaked with gray, the kind of person you want around when things go wrong. I followed him back, every step feeling like a countdown. He checked under the hood, tested the starter, the battery, even crawled underneath with a flashlight. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Finally, he stood up, wiping his palms on his jeans, brow knotted. There's nothing wrong with it, he said. Then why won't it start? My voice cracked, panic spilling through the cracks. He hesitated, glancing toward the tree line as if he knew better than to say the answer out loud. Try it now, he muttered. I climbed inside, sat down, took the key in trembling fingers, and turned. The engine roared to life. Not sputtering, not struggling. Perfect. As if the RV had just decided to behave. The maintenance guy didn't cheer, didn't smile. He backed away slowly, like someone stepping from a cliff edge. The ranger's eyes shone with relief and fear all mixed together. You need to go, she said, before sunset. I didn't argue. I threw everything into the RV, half-packed, dishes unwashed, blinds left open. I didn't care. I just needed distance, needed to outrun whatever had claimed me last night. But as I put the RV in gear, the ranger stepped up to the window, gripping the sill. "Don't look in your mirrors if you hear it," she said firmly. "And don't stop, no matter what." Her hand was shaking. I nodded, not because I was brave, but because words wouldn't come. I pulled away from camp, gravel crunching beneath the wheels like bones snapping. Every foot farther from that site felt like a breath forced back into my lungs. Trees blurred by in walls of green and shadow. The sky was too bright, too exposed. The world felt wrong, like daylight was only pretending to protect me. 5 minutes down the road, something hit the side of the RV. Hard. The vehicle lurched and I almost slammed on the brakes. But the ranger's warning echoed through me. "Don't stop." I tightened my grip on the wheel, knuckles white. Another hit, this time from underneath. The same place I'd heard those knocks before. The sound crawled up the frame, clawing, dragging, as if something clung to the undercarriage, hitching a ride. A whisper seeped through the floorboards. Andrew. Anger, fear, desperation, all tangled into one voice. A voice that wasn't allowed daylight but followed me anyway. I floored the accelerator. Trees shot by like prison bars breaking apart. The road bent and twisted through dense forest, every curve a threat to slow me down. Then the third hit came, against the back door. Metal screeched as if something large scraped alongside, trying to peel its way inside. I nearly lost control, tires skidding on gravel before gripping again. Don't look in the mirrors, but instinct betrayed me. I glanced into the rear view and saw nothing. Just the swaying forest road behind me, empty. But the whisper persisted. I'm still here. I pressed harder on the gas, engines howling as I pushed the RV to speeds it wasn't built for. Branches whipped overhead like claws reaching down. The mountain peaks ahead felt like salvation, distance, altitude, escape. Another 5 minutes passed, then 10. Eventually the road straightened, sunlight pouring through a break in the trees. Civilization came back in small signs. A road marker, 2 parked cars, a sign pointing toward the exit of Glacier National Park. Only then did the whisper fade. Not gone. Retreating. The further I got from the boundary of the park, the lighter my body felt. The air loosened around my throat. The sun warmed instead of warned. By the time I passed the entrance sign on my way out, the same one scarred with long, deep scratches, tears blurred my vision. I didn't stop driving for hours. Eventually, I reached a gas station far from Glacier, a flat land with open sky and no trees standing watch. Only then did I collapse in the driver's seat, shaking as I realized what I'd escaped. Escape, not victory. Because escape doesn't mean it isn't still out there. I slept in the gas station lot that night. Lights buzzing overhead, cars rolling past on the highway, noise, blessed noise, proof that I wasn't alone anymore. But even then, I didn't feel safe. At 2:14 a.m., I woke up, not to a sound, but a feeling, that cold awareness, the sensation of being observed, measured. I stayed absolutely still, breathing shallow, and then I saw it. In the reflection of the microwave door across from my bed, my own silhouette, and behind me a darker outline, tall and thin, standing just outside the window. I didn't look, didn't turn, didn't acknowledge, because I finally understood the rule. The moment you admit it exists, it owns you. Minutes passed, maybe an hour. Eventually, the shadow shifted, sliding downward, vanishing out of sight. I waited until dawn before moving. When the sun finally rose, I stepped outside, heart hammering, hoping daylight would prove it had all been paranoia. But beneath the bedroom window of the RV, in the soft gravel below, there were more prints. Bare. Deep. Facing inward. Like it had stood there all night, staring in at me. I'm hundreds of miles from Glacier now. Different states, different forests. Everywhere I go, I choose campgrounds with people, noise, open fields where shadows have nowhere to hide. And yet, I never sleep fully. Because sometimes right before dawn, when the fog is low and the world feels half-formed, I hear a gentle tapping. Not enough to wake the birds, but loud enough to wake me. Sometimes it whispers my name again. The syllables stretch like hunger. Sometimes it laughs. I know it followed me. I know it isn't bound to Glacier's borders. It was never about the park. It was about attention. Recognition. The moment I looked for it, the moment I listened, the moment I feared it, I invited it in. So now I live a different kind of RV life. I still travel, I still chase sunsets, but I've learned not every beautiful place wants you there. Not every silent night is peaceful. Sometimes the stillness is hunting. And if you ever camp there in Glacier and you hear footsteps circling your RV, do not answer the voice that knows your name. Do not let curiosity outrun fear. Do not look. Because once you acknowledge the thing that watches, you will never be alone again. I didn't understand what real fear felt like until the night the forest went silent behind my old Volkswagen, leaving me with nothing but my own breath and the uneasy knowledge that something out there knew exactly where I was. I'd been camping for most of my life, long enough to believe I had learned the rhythm of the wilderness, the way the air shifts before a storm, the strange metallic scent before a temperature drop, the difference between the sound of a raccoon's steps and something heavier. But that night felt like a page ripped out of a rule book I had trusted for too long. And if I'm being honest, part of me had been carrying a quiet arrogance, the belief that because I camped in a vintage Volkswagen instead of a regular camper, nature somehow respected the nostalgia. I thought I knew enough not to get in trouble. I learned quickly, the wild doesn't care how prepared you think you are. The trip started as a test run for myself, a challenge after months of feeling stuck, exhausted, and strangely detached from my own routines. I'm 34 now, and somewhere along the way, the things I used to love turned into reminders of everything I'd postponed. Friendships, trips, even rest. So I picked a map point at random, a quiet, unmarked campground tucked behind a forgotten stretch of pine woods in northern Utah. Not a popular spot. Not one of the places that show up on curated lists of hidden gems. That anonymity was what drew me in. A friend of mine, Ethan, had been there a few times when he was younger. He warned me it wasn't well maintained, said the road in was rough, and the nearest ranger post was about 40 minutes away. But he also described it as peaceful, the kind of place where you could hear your own thoughts long before you heard another person. That sounded good to me at the time. I didn't realize that sometimes hearing only your own thoughts leaves too much room for what you try to ignore. I pulled in late in the afternoon, the Volkswagen humming the way it always does before a steep incline. The place looked empty. A few old fire pits, half-buried picnic tables, some torn signs whose warnings had long faded into illegible streaks. Nothing unusual for a neglected site. What struck me wasn't the quiet. It was the way the quiet felt thick, as if the whole place were holding its breath. I parked near a cluster of pines leaning in toward each other like they were sharing a secret. The ground was soft, covered with a mat of brown needles that muffled my footsteps. As I stepped out, I noticed the air smelled different, warmer than it should have been, with a faint sweetness that didn't belong to the pines. Something about it reminded me of old fruit left too long in a warm room. Not exactly rotten, but close. At the time, I chalked it up to some sap or decaying plant matter. The wild is full of weird smells. That was my first mistake, explaining away what I should have kept noticing. Still, the evening light was beautiful, gold leaking sideways through the trunks, making the air look dusted with tiny flecks of amber. I set up my small camp, laid out my folding chair, opened the side door of the van to let in the breeze, and scraped together enough sticks for a fire I didn't plan to light until later. It felt good to have the quiet. Freeing, even. I kept thinking about something Ethan once said. Some campgrounds, he claimed, have personalities, territories shaped by what's been done there, who passed through, what lingered long after people left. I never believed him. But standing there, I felt watched in a way that was not threatening, just observant. Curiously observant. Like the place was trying to figure out who I was and why I'd come alone. I cooked a small dinner on my portable stove. Nothing fancy, just canned chili and a bit of bread, and ate with my feet dangling out of the side of the van. Twilight crept in slowly, stretching shadows across the clearing. The forest noises, Crickets, small rustles, the occasional cracking twig gave the place a rhythmic comfort. For a while, it felt like exactly the escape I'd needed. But subtle things started to shift. The first sign was a pattern I didn't catch until much later. Every so often, the crickets would stop. Not for long, maybe 2 or 3 seconds at a time. Just a sudden pause in the background noise, followed by a gradual restart as if someone had hit a mute button and then slowly released it. I told myself it was nothing. Predators passing through. Natural. Routine. The second sign was harder to rationalize. A faint tapping sound somewhere deeper in the trees. Slow. Not like branches clacking together in wind. More rhythmic. Not quite human, not quite animal. I leaned forward slightly, listening. The tapping stopped the moment I paid attention. I shook it off. Unease, I thought. Just my mind adjusting to being alone out here. But unease has a way of planting seeds. As night settled and the temperature dropped, I climbed into the van and stretched out across the mattress I'd set up in the back. A lantern glowed faintly near my feet, brushing soft shadows across the ceiling. I tried to read for a while, but couldn't focus. Every now and then I would glance toward the windows, watching the shape of the forest shift with the dim moonlight. Then came the third sign, one I couldn't ignore. It happened around midnight. I had just started drifting toward sleep when something brushed the side of the Volkswagen. Not hard, not aggressive, more like a slow drag. Fabric against metal. I sat up immediately, listening, heart quickening. For several seconds, there was nothing. Then the sound came again, from the back this time. A soft, gliding touch, like fingertips tracing the outline of the van. I turned off the lantern. The darkness grew dense, and the only sound was my breathing, too loud, too uneven. My instincts whispered that whatever was out there was not just passing through. It was exploring. Testing the boundaries of my space. I slid quietly toward the window above my mattress and peered between the curtains. At first, all I saw were trees, their silhouettes swaying gently. But then I noticed something nearer, something lower to the ground. A vague shape, barely visible. It didn't move, didn't shift. It just crouched there, a few feet from the van, blended into the shadow. My throat tightened. For a long moment, I didn't breathe. I blinked hard, trying to make out detail, but moonlight barely reached that part of the clearing. All I could see was the suggestion of a figure, compact, hunched, utterly still, watching. A surge of instinct told me not to turn on the lantern, not to make any sudden movements. I stayed frozen, staring into the dark, willing my eyes to adjust. But before I could get a clear sense of what it was, the shape moved. Not toward me, not away. Just a slow, deliberate shift deeper into shadow until it disappeared entirely. I waited a full minute before I exhaled. There are moments in life when fear doesn't hit you like a wave. It seeps in quietly, filling all the empty corners of your mind until you realize you've been holding your breath without knowing. I lay down again, but didn't close my eyes. I wasn't sure what I'd seen. I told myself it could have been a deer, a raccoon, something harmless. But deep down, I felt something else. Recognition. That prickling awareness when your instincts understand a threat before your mind does. The forest had gone silent again, and this time it didn't restart. Silence in the forest isn't always a warning. Sometimes it's just a lull, a moment between movements. But the silence that night felt wrong. Too complete, too absolute. It pressed against the windows of the Volkswagen, against my chest, against every instinct I'd ever trusted. It was the kind of silence that didn't simply fall. It arrived with intention. I stayed lying down, barely breathing, my eyes fixed on the dim outline of the window frame. Every muscle in my body tightened, waiting for the next sound, but nothing came. No leaves rustling, no distant owls, no small animals digging through the underbrush, just that heavy, unnatural quiet. Eventually, I forced myself to sit up. I needed air. The inside of the van felt suffocating, like the silence had seeped through the seams and was filling the space inch by inch. My hand trembled slightly as I cracked the side window open, letting in the cold. It wasn't until the fresh air hit my face that I realized I'd been sweating. I listened again. Still nothing. The tapping from earlier didn't return. Neither did the sound of something brushing against the van. I should have been relieved, but instead, a new fear began to form, fear of not knowing whether whatever was out there was gone or simply waiting. I considered turning on the van and leaving, but rationality barged in, unwelcome and inconvenient. The road out was narrow, rocky, lined with thick clusters of trees. Driving it in the dark would be dangerous. I told myself I just needed to wait until morning, just a few hours. But fear doesn't care about rationality. It only cares about the opening it's given. After maybe half an hour, though it felt longer, I heard something faint. At first I thought it was wind, but then it came again, steady this time. Not tapping, not brushing, breathing, not my breathing, soft, slow, too controlled to be an animal. It came from the ground level on the passenger side, close to the door, close enough that I could feel a tremor of vibration through the metal. My heartbeat kicked into my throat. I leaned forward inch by inch, pressing my ear toward the passenger window. For a moment, the breathing stopped, and all I heard was my own pulse thudding in my head. Then, as if responding to my attention, it resumed. Quieter this time. Almost deliberately quieter. Like whoever, or whatever, was out there didn't want to be heard but couldn't quite hold it in. When something human tries to mimic something not human, the result is always unsettling. I slid my hand to the small pocket knife I kept under my pillow. It wasn't much, wouldn't help against anything determined, but it helped me breathe a little easier. Another sound followed, a shift of weight on the soft ground, barely audible but unmistakable. The same precise exploratory movement I'd heard earlier, only now closer, much closer. I shut the window quietly. The seconds stretched out like taut wire. I waited for a shadow to pass across the curtains, for the handle to rattle, for something to break the standoff. But after several minutes, the breathing stopped again. This time, it didn't return. Eventually, exhaustion pried at my eyelids. I didn't sleep, but I drifted in and out of shallow awareness, startled awake by each small creak of the van's frame, unsure if it was the cooling metal or something outside testing its patience. Every time I surfaced from that half-sleep, I checked the windows again, searching for a shape I prayed I wouldn't find. Around 4 a.m, I must have finally slipped into a deeper sleep, because the next thing I knew, I was waking to light. Faint. Pale dawn. I sat up quickly, pressing my hand against the window to block the glare as I scanned the clearing. The forest looked different in daylight, less menacing, more familiar. The pines swayed gently in the morning breeze, a squirrel darted across the ground, birdsong returned by filling the air with its usual soundtrack. If I hadn't lived through the night, I would have said the place looked peaceful. But unease lived in the details. In the soft soil around the van were marks. Not footprints. Not exactly. More like impressions, round, evenly spaced, almost too symmetrical. They circled the Volkswagen in a loose, wandering pattern, looping back on themselves like something had been pacing, thinking, observing. I crouched beside one of them, touching the edge gently. It wasn't deep. Whatever made it wasn't heavy. But the shape, it didn't look like anything I recognized. Not hoof, not paw, not boot. Something else. Something I didn't want to name. A cold breath rolled through me. I stood up quickly, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved except the branches swaying, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something out there was still watching, that the woods were pretending to be harmless now that the sun was up. I should have left then. Packed up, driven out, followed my instincts instead of my pride. But fear does strange things to rational thought. I told myself I needed to understand what had happened, that leaving without answers was surrendering to superstition, that maybe I'd imagined more than I realized. That was my second mistake, reasoning with fear instead of listening to it. I made coffee on the stove, the warmth grounding me for a moment. As the steam curled into the air, a strange scent drifted through the clearing again, that same sweet overheated smell from the night before. Stronger this time. Closer. I turned slowly, scanning the clearing again. Nothing. but the smell lingered, thick and clinging, like it was coming from the ground itself. Then I noticed something near the edge of the trees. Strewn across the needle-covered soil were several small objects, tiny, white, almost perfectly shaped. At first I thought they were stones, but as I stepped closer, I saw the truth. Teeth, small, human-like, clean, too clean, as if they'd been scrubbed or worn down. They sat in a small cluster, arranged in a semicircle, deliberate. My stomach clenched. I stepped back without realizing it, my boots crunching on dried needles. A sudden wave of cold washed through me, and not from the wind. The air around me seemed to tighten. I didn't hear any breathing this time, but it felt like someone was holding theirs. I backed away slowly, returning to the van. My fingers shook as I slid open the side door and climbed in. I didn't pack anything neatly. I grabbed whatever was in reach, stove, mug, chair, tossing it all inside in a disorganized pile. I slammed the door shut, turned the key in the ignition, and felt the engine shudder awake beneath me. As I pulled out, I glanced one last time toward the cluster of trees. Something was standing between them. Not fully visible. Not fully hidden. Just far enough in the shadows that it remained a silhouette. But tall, far taller than the crouched shape I'd glimpsed the night before. Its outline was wrong, too slender in some places, too broad in others, as if it didn't quite fit together the way a body should. It didn't move as I drove away. It only tilted its head slightly, as though memorizing me. The road out felt longer than the road in. Every turn seemed tighter, every stretch of trees taller, every sound sharper. I kept checking the mirrors, half expecting to see that silhouette darting through the trees behind me, keeping pace, but nothing followed. Nothing chased. The woods simply watched me leave. 40 minutes later, I reached the ranger station. I thought I'd feel relief, safety, some kind of grounding after the night I survived. But the moment I stepped out of the van, I realized something wasn't right. The ranger standing outside, a middle-aged guy with a gray beard and tired eyes, looked at me with a strange expression, like he'd been expecting me. And before I could speak, he said quietly, "You camped up there alone last night, didn't you?" I nodded slowly. His jaw tensed. "You need to tell me exactly what you saw." His voice didn't sound curious. It sounded resigned, like he already knew the shape of the story I was about to tell, but needed to hear it aloud to confirm something he didn't want to believe. The morning sun glowed behind him, but his face stayed shadowed under the brim of his hat, making it hard to read his expression fully. For a moment, I said nothing. I just stood there, my hands still on the open van door, trying to decide whether I should lie, soften the truth, or tell him everything exactly as it happened. "Start from the part that made you leave," he said, not unkindly. "People don't drive down that road before 8 unless something scared them." His wording made me pause. People, not campers, not visitors. People, like he wasn't surprised at all. I swallowed, my throat dry from hours of adrenaline and stale van air. "Something was around my campsite last night," I said. "Something watching the van." He didn't flinch, didn't lean in, just kept listening silently like he'd been trained not to react too soon. I told him about the tapping, the brushing, the breathing. I didn't mention the teeth, not yet. I didn't know how much I wanted to admit before I understood what he already knew. When I finished describing the shape I'd seen in the shadows, the ranger let out a slow breath through his nose, the kind someone releases when a puzzle piece they hoped was missing finally clicks into place. "I should have put up signs," he muttered. "We were supposed to do it last week." "What's up there?" I asked. "Animals? Something dangerous?" My voice cracked on the last word. I tried to hide it, but I think he heard the fear anyway. He looked past me at the forested slope rising toward the campground. "Depends on what you call dangerous. Sometimes it's not the animals that worry us." A cold shiver slid down my back. I waited for him to explain, but he stayed quiet, chewing on whatever words he didn't want to say. Then he gestured toward the station door. "Let's talk inside." I hesitated. The van felt like the closest thing I had to safety, even with its thin walls and shaking frame. But something in the ranger's tone told me refusing wasn't an option, so I followed him inside. The station interior was warm and cluttered, maps pinned to corkboards, old radios stacked along the desk, a bulletin wall filled with notices about fire danger and hiking rules. Nothing unusual. But the air felt heavy, as if the conversations that had taken place inside these walls had left an imprint. The ranger motioned for me to sit. "Name?" he asked. "Caleb." He nodded like he'd expected that too, which made no sense. Then he pulled open a drawer and removed a small notebook, worn, smudged, the edges frayed from being handled too much. He flipped it open to a page already filled with writing. "How long did the breathing last?" he asked without looking up. The question hit me hard. Not what breathing? Not you sure it wasn't an animal? Just how long? "Couple minutes," I said, "off and on." "And the tapping?" I told him. "And the marks on the ground?" I froze. I had never mentioned the marks. His eyes lifted to meet mine, and something like apology flickered there. "You saw them, didn't you?" "Yeah," I admitted quietly. "And there were teeth." "More than one?" he asked. "5 or 6. He closed the notebook, rubbing the back of his neck. "There were supposed to be signs up there telling people not to camp alone. We've been getting reports for months, strange noises, shadows watching campsites, things going missing. But nothing directly harmful, nothing crossing a line. Most of us thought it was locals trespassing or someone screwing with visitors." "It wasn't a person," I said. "Not like any person I've ever seen." "I believe you," he replied immediately. That shook me more than anything. Not reassurance, not skepticism, just quiet acceptance. I leaned forward. "What is it?" He hesitated again, then walked to a filing cabinet, pulling out a thin folder. Inside were printed photos, grainy, blurry shots taken at night, trees, brush, empty clearings. But in 2 of them, something stood in the distance, a shape, slender, wrong. Easier to see in these photos than it had been in the shadows. "That was taken last fall," he said. "Different part of the forest, but same general behavior." "What behavior?" I asked, my fingers tightening around the metal armrest of the chair. "Watching," he said. "Not attacking, not approaching camps directly, mostly just circling, observing." "Why?" He looked down at the folder, almost embarrassed. "That's what we've been trying to figure out." I pointed to the photos. "What even is that, an animal?" He shook his head. "Not any animal we know, and the tracks don't match wildlife. Too shallow, too precise." "So what, a person?" His face tightened. "I've been doing this job for over 20 years. I've seen people do strange things in the woods, but whatever's up there isn't human." I don't know how else to put it. My stomach twisted. "Then why isn't the place closed?" "Budget," he said simply. "And uncertainty. Nobody wants to shut down a whole region of forest because of shadows." "You said people filed reports," I countered. "People report things all the time," he replied, sighing. "Most turn out to be nothing, and the incidents up there, they always stop short of real danger. No injuries, no disappearances tied directly to the sightings." The word directly hung in the air like a weight. "And the teeth?" I asked. "That's new," he admitted. "We've never had anything like that." I leaned back, trying to steady my breathing. But the room felt smaller, the walls closer, the forest outside suddenly impossibly vast. "So what do I do now?" I asked. "Do I report this officially?" He didn't answer right away. He stepped to the window, staring up the slope toward the tree line. When he finally spoke, it was quiet. "You leave the area, for a while at least." "That's it? That's all I can tell you." The helplessness in his voice surprised me. He wasn't hiding anything malicious. He was scared too. But before I could ask more, the radio on his desk crackled loudly, making both of us jump. A voice came through. Urgent, breathless. "Mark, you there? We've got movement near the old ridge above the north site. Something's pacing just beyond the tree line. Can't get a clear visual." The ranger, Mark, grabbed the radio. "How close?" "Less than 50 yards. Been circling for 15 minutes. You need to get up here." My blood turned cold. 15 minutes. The exact time I'd been sitting inside the station telling him what I saw. Mark looked toward me with an expression that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite disbelief. It was something heavier, something like inevitability. "I'll be there in 10, he said into the radio. When he turned back to me, He looked older, tired, like he'd been carrying the weight of this thing for years. "Get in your van," he said quietly. "Drive straight out of the forest. Don't stop. Not for anything." What's happening?" I asked. He hesitated. "We think it follows people." My heart stuttered. "Follows? Not right away," he said. "Not always. Some reports, people swear they see something days later, near their homes, across the street, in the backyard, never close, just watching." My mouth went dry. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you look directly at it," he said, "and from what we've seen, that's when it remembers." The ground beneath me seemed to shift. I took a step back, feeling the instinct to run flare up so hard it made my vision blur. Mark opened the station door, scanning the trees again. "Go," he said, "and whatever you do, don't look back up the mountain." I didn't ask anything else. I bolted for the Volkswagen, threw myself inside, and turned the engine over so fast the ignition choked. When it finally caught, I tore out of the lot, gravel kicking up under the tires as I sped toward the main road. I didn't look in the mirrors. Not once. But as the forest thickened on both sides and the narrow road curved away from the ranger station, the air inside the van shifted again, barely subtly, like a breath brushing the back of my neck. I told myself it was nothing, but the silence behind me felt deliberate. And the urge to look over my shoulder grew so strong, it felt like someone whispering directly into my ear. I didn't look back. Not then, not during the winding climb toward the main highway, not when the trees pressed so close on both sides that branches scraped the roof of the Volkswagen like fingers dragging across metal. I kept my eyes locked forward, knuckles white on the steering wheel, breath tight in my throat. The van's engine hummed steadily beneath me, but the silence behind the sound felt too dense, too aware. Every instinct I had screamed to check the mirrors. But I didn't. Not because of the ranger's warning, though it echoed in my head like a command carved into stone, but because somewhere deep in my chest, in that soft, primal place that remembers what the mind wants to forget, I already knew what I would see if I looked. I reached the main highway long before I expected to. Asphalt appeared under my wheels like salvation. Dark, smooth, familiar. Civilization, or at least something pretending to be it. I didn't slow. I didn't breathe easier. I just drove. Miles and miles of empty road stretched ahead of me, winding through valleys where the pines thinned and the sky opened wider. Still, the pressure at the back of my neck wouldn't lift. I drove for 2 hours before the first gas station finally came into view. A lonely little place squatting on the edge of nowhere with a single pump and a flickering fluorescent sign. It was the first sign of human life since the ranger station. My tank was half full. I didn't need to stop, but I needed people. I pulled in. The engine ticked as it cooled. The sky had warmed to a gentle late morning blue, and the world felt normal in a way that almost hurt. A man in a canvas work jacket stepped out of the station store, glanced at me, nodded, and went back inside. His presence alone made my breath loosen. Nothing supernatural happens next to a guy buying cigarettes, right? I filled the tank, went inside, bought a coffee, and forced myself not to look at the reflections in the glass doors. I didn't want to know if something was standing behind me in the mirror world version of the parking lot. The cashier was young, maybe 19, tapping absently on the counter with chipped black nail polish. When he handed me my change, he paused. "You all right?" he asked. I almost said yes, reflex, social autopilot, but I couldn't form the lie. "Just tired," I muttered. "Long night?" "You could say that." He nodded like he understood, but his eyes lingered on mine a moment too long. Not suspiciously, just searchingly. "Be careful out there," he said softly. I almost asked why, but some part of me didn't want to hear it. I thanked him and left. Back in the van, I sat there for a moment, trying to decide if I'd convince myself that everything I'd experienced in the forest was some kind of nightmare. Sleep deprivation, imagination, a trick of light and sound. People rationalize worse things to feel safe. But denial doesn't erase the truth. The teeth were real. The breathing was real. The silhouette had been real. I took a sip of coffee and started the engine again. As I pulled onto the highway, I almost believed the worst was behind me. Almost. For the next few hours, nothing unusual happened. No strange figures on the roadside, no shadows pacing the edge of the forest, no overwhelming sense of being followed. Just road, just sunlight, just the steady hum of the Volkswagen carrying me farther and farther from that place. By mid-afternoon, I reached the small town where I'd booked a motel for the night. It wasn't much, a faded sign, a gravel lot, 2 floors of doors painted a tired shade of green. I checked in, carried my bag inside, and showered until my skin felt scraped clean. For the first time in nearly 24 hours, I let myself relax. That was my mistake. That was when it came back. It happened just after sunset while I was sitting on the edge of the bed, scrolling through the photos on my phone. I was trying to make sense of the impressions around the van. Snapping the pictures in daylight had felt brave then, but now each image looked like evidence of something worse. Something intelligent, something organized. I reached the last photo and froze. Behind my van, faint, nearly invisible between 2 trees, was a shape. Tall, slender, angled wrong. I stared at the photo for what felt like minutes, but was probably seconds. My chest tightened, my vision tunneled. I zoomed in, and there it was. Even pixelated, even blurred by distance, the silhouette was unmistakable. It had followed me, not to the ranger station, not to the gas station. Me. A cold hum filled my head. I rose slowly from the bed and crossed to the motel window. The blinds were half open, revealing a slice of the parking lot below. The Volkswagen sat under the yellow glow of a lamppost, dust still clinging to its tires. The shadows around the building looked normal, but that didn't reassure me, because the ranger's warning came rushing back all at once. Some people swear they see something days later, in their backyard, across the street, watching. Watching, not approaching, not breaking in, not attacking, just watching. My palms began to sweat. I shut the blinds and stepped away from the window. The room felt smaller now, tighter, like the air had thickened. I checked the doors locked twice. Then again, hours crawled by. Midnight came and went, and then just when I thought the worst of my imagination had drained itself dry, something tapped on the motel window. Soft, slow, deliberate, exactly the way it had tapped on the van. My entire body went cold. I didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't blink. The tapping came again, 2 gentle knocks, spaced evenly, as if waiting for a response. I stood there frozen, every nerve screaming but incapable of acting. The window curtain swayed slightly, just barely, as if a hand had brushed against it from the outside. I forced myself to take 1 step back, then another. The room felt electric, charged with a presence I couldn't see but felt with every fiber of my being. The tapping didn't repeat. The silence deepened, and then, so quietly, I almost thought I imagined it breathing. Not close, but not far. A presence on the other side of the thin motel wall, measuring its distance from me the same way it had measured the van. I sat down on the bed slowly, never taking my eyes off the window. I didn't reach for the light. I didn't speak. I didn't dare. After maybe 10 minutes, the longest 10 minutes of my life, the breathing faded. The pressure in the air eased. The sense of being observed lifted, inch by inch. When I finally stood and gathered the courage to peek through the blinds, the parking lot was empty. But something had changed. The Volkswagen's headlights were on. I hadn't touched the keys. I stepped back again, heart pounding. I wanted to call the ranger, the police, anyone. But what would I say? Something followed me out of the forest. Something knocked on my window. Something turned on my headlights. And then, somehow more terrifying than anything else, I realized the fear wasn't the lesson. It was the clarity, the understanding. The truth finally settling in like a cold weight. Whatever was in those woods wasn't territorial. It wasn't guarding something. It wasn't hunting. It was curious. It was learning. It was remembering. And it wasn't confined to the forest. It traveled with the people who saw it. A shadow that carried itself from place to place, not bound by borders or boundaries or the fragile definitions of what we call wild. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't sleep the next night either. Some fears don't fade. Some lessons don't dissolve with sunlight or coffee or the safety of distance. Sometimes survival isn't the end of the story. Sometimes it's just the beginning of understanding the truth about the wilderness, about the things that linger in the silent spaces between trees, about the things that watch from the edges of campgrounds and the corners of headlights, and about the things that follow. I still camp. I still drive the Volkswagen into places most people avoid, but I don't go alone anymore. I don't ignore instincts. I don't pretend fear is a weakness, because fear is a compass. Fear tells you when something is wrong. Fear is the voice that whispers leave now before something else decides you waited too long. And that night in the forest taught me something I'll never forget. The wild isn't just the land we explore. It's the things that explore us. And if you ever find yourself camped alone in the deep parts of the American wilderness, and you hear tapping on the side of your vehicle, or breathing that isn't yours, or see impressions in the soil shaped like nothing you recognize, don't wait, don't rationalize, don't look for answers. Just go. Because some things don't want to harm you. They just want to see if you'll notice them. And once you do, they never forget your face. Not after one night. Not ever.